Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. On this show, we're winding back the clock to our earliest memories of Mike's work, a book that I saw on Pops's coffee table in the early 80s and was immediately entranced by the cover. Back in those days, it was a frequent occurrence to see these striking images. The first corgi edition of Wheels of Terror was one I'd already had my greedy mitts on for a while, having moved on to that and Where Eagles Dare from my steady diet of Target Doctor Who books. But I was beginning to get absorbed by the lurid fantasy and sci-fi covers, and this one, along with the first Ace edition of Stormbringer and the Sphere edition of Poul Anderson's The Broken Sword, with that Patrick Woodruff art, were amongst my earliest transitional books. And by that, I suppose I mean that they were the first books that made me realise that, for all that I dug Conan and other fantasy and sci-fi I may have been reading around the same time, this genre was a mine of depth and possibilities and had a whole lot more to it than met the eye. I should point out that my earliest experiences of Conan were largely dominated by the Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter era captured in the Sphere paperbacks, so it certainly wasn't a pure Conan experience. Nevertheless, that first edition of Stormbringer and, the focus of this podcast, the Warlord of the Air, blew my mind wide open. Many of the themes probably went over my head when I was 13, of course, but it was all wrapped up in a vivid and propulsive boy's own tale of adventure, wonder, and warfare, and it had warring airships on the cover too. As it happens, this is yet another Moorcock book that has had a preponderance of fantastic evocative covers over the years by many great artists, including Melvyn Grant and Patrick Woodruff. But that first edition Ace paperback I got from Pops remains my favourite, even if its Dave Meltzer cover is slightly more fanciful than the others, with black gull-winged fighter planes swooping among stricken silver airships. To be honest, as a wee lad who was still reeling from the World War II fighter plane-inspired action in the Star Wars movies, that cover was so dynamic and exciting, there's no wonder I was immediately drawn to it. On this show, I'm joined by newsman and author Robert MacMillan, dialing in from his island retreat in the midst of the Atlantic. Robert's been a friend of the podcast for nearly 6 years and we've been building up to this for almost as long, so we ended up banging on at length about our experiences with this book. Therefore, this will be, at minimum, a two-parter. Maybe 3. Who knows? We're mysterious people and we will not be cowed by run times. So brush down your filthy old suit, park the opium pipe for a couple of hours, and join us in our dingy island hotel bar as we look at the Warlord of the Air. We're back in Derry and Tom's. Welcome back to the podcast, Robert MacMillan.
It's great to be here again.
The last time we recorded, of course, was in a cafe in Bradford, just after I'd recovered from COVID.
That's
which
right.
was a bit of a story in and of itself. But you're not in Bradford this time
I'm
around.
not in Bradford as we speak. I am on the island of Pico in the Azores archipelago, which of course is an autonomous region of the country of Portugal. So I'm about a 2-hour and 45-minute flight directly west of Lisbon.
How unpleasant that must be.
You know, it's really hard. I'm not sure how I make it, but you know what? It's my lot in life. Paradise.
You sent me a picture yesterday morning of your view, and I must say it trumped mine quite considerably. I was quite jealous, but
I happen to like your view. I've seen your view from your place.
You have, and it's okay. It's suburban. It's not too bad in this neck of the woods, to be honest. But you know what? Yours was better. That's all I'm going to say. Yours was better.
You'll see it in person sometime.
That would be lovely. Yeah. Before we kick off in earnest, do you have an appropriate beverage to hand? You know the score with this podcast. We were in a coffee shop last time, but this time you're in your own digs.
Digression number 1. I went out to a social gathering 2 nights ago, at which I stayed until 2 a.m. and drank a fair amount of wine.
You animal.
And then I got up the next morning at 8 after going to bed at 2 to work my shift at the Reuters news agency. I then was feeling a little slow, so I went to another social occasion where I stayed out until 2. And that time I drank wine followed by whiskey.
Oh.
And then I got up this morning to work my shift again, just like the day before. So at the moment, I wouldn't call myself hungover, but I'd call myself somewhere. Well, what would Moorcock say? What would the Warlord of the Air say? I'm somewhere on the other side of Tekubenga. Alive.
Yeah, I'm impressed, to be honest.
Alive, with no access to the outside world, and nobody quite knows how I got here. So
you know what? I am deeply impressed that you're actually capable of doing that 2 nights running. I
I
think that would
almost
lay me
called
low for
you.
3 days.
I almost called you in the morning to say, Andy, I'm not sure I can do this, but I'm here.
Well, I'm glad you didn't.
And so what I have with me here at my little secretary desk is at the moment a large cup of very hot water that has an entire box of fresh mint in it. So
Mm.
mint tea. That's my warm up. And for when I'm feeling a little more fortified after the mint tea, I'm switching to Bushmills Original Irish Whiskey, which
Oh,
I'm
very
going to cut
nice.
with a generous amount of water.
Mm. Very nice. That sounds excellent. I was thinking earlier, right, so this story kicks off with a Victorian captain of the Bengal Lancers in the Himalayas. You know, what would they be? I mean, at the end of the day, it's gin and tonic, isn't it? You've got to keep the malaria away at
Yes,
these
that's
times
right.
of year.
I gave up on the gin and tonics a number of years ago because when I was living and working around Times Square, uh, I enjoyed them too much.
Yeah. It turns out we had no tonic.
And this, oh,
And it's a shame, really, because as we were dealing with a man out of his element, I was hoping I could dig out the bottle of pickled gin that Phil got me for
ooh,
Christmas a couple of years ago, but I can't find it. So I'm settling for some Slingsby gooseberry gin from down the road in Harrogate,
all
and
right.
I'm drinking it with some brand of ginger ale I've never actually heard of, Skinny Ginger. So that'll do for me. Gooseberry gin and tonic. Might have a
I'd love
couple
to
of
meet a skinny
ports.
ginger someday, but it keeps not happening.
Well, there must be out there somewhere, mustn't there?
I'm here
Yeah,
all week.
yeah. But funnily enough, even though I didn't find my particularly outlandish gin, I did find something outlandish today in the shop, which I thought was quite appropriate. A British staple that may as well come from a weird parallel Earth. Jammy Dodgers.
Holy moly.
However, banana flavour.
What's the default?
The default is raspberry jam,
Oh,
and I do think that I made a serious mistake varying from the default because they're not very nice.
wow.
So might
I'm
need some
sorry.
explanation to non-British listeners, but Jammy Dodgers are a classic British biscuit, which is 2 slices of shortbread with jam in the middle and a little love heart. Don't buy banana flavour Jammy Dodgers, everybody. It was a critical mistake.
Um,
Anyway,
my British, or I suppose more appropriately English, sweet that I favor the most, and every couple of years I have a deep need to eat a whole bag of them. Is all sorts.
oh yeah, I am partial to a licorice also.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah, I tend to have a bag at Christmas. You know, well, I'll have a pint of Malibu and Coke, bag of licorice, all sorts, some cheese footballs, and you know what? By the time this goes out, because we're recording this at the end of November, by the time this goes out, it will be almost Christmas. So I'll probably be up to my ears in Malibu and Coke and cheese footballs.
Yep.
But
And by the time that happens, I'm going to buy. I'm going to go to the bulk items store, and I'm going to find myself a bunch of licorice, all sorts, and try to offer them to my friends who will refuse.
oh, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing,
No,
is it?
certainly
No,
not.
jolly good. Well, anyway, we are here to talk about the Warlord of the Air, but because we discussed it last year in what ended up being something of a fix-up episode in our cafe in Bradford, where the audio was super terrible, and I had to do a lot of work on trying to fix it because I chose the wrong tools for the wrong job, and it was particularly noisy in there. But just recap your relationship with Moorcock for us before we kick off, for anybody who didn't listen to that episode.
I discovered the works of Michael Moorcock in the summer of 1987. I was born in 73. I'm 52 years old now. So I was on my first trip outside the United States of my life. I was spending the summer with my mother's older sister, who had gone to America from Germany, but then she returned and she took her children with her.
Hmm.
And so they were living in a southwestern German town called Tübingen, which is a home to a famous university. Kepler, I believe, either studied or taught there. I don't remember which. It's a beautiful old town. Goethe lived there for a short time and hated it, which is part of the town's marketing attraction. Um, but I was there in the summer, and my cousin Mark Zalaman, he was and is an AD&D dungeon master of
Hmm.
great renown and repute. I, on the other hand, never caught on with RPG. So as much as I enjoy listening to you all talk about it, it's not what I do. But he had, in addition to the amazing AD&D bestiaries and the guide to all the monsters, which I read cover to cover countless times. He had a bunch of great fantasy and science fiction books on his shelf, and one of them was this omnibus edition of The Nomad of Time. And I didn't know the name, I didn't know what any of it meant, but when I looked on the back, and I saw 1903 Nepal, Temple of the Future Buddha, catapulted into a brave new world, and I thought, it's speaking to me. It's speaking to me. It was going to give me a break from Vanity Fair by Thackeray, which I'd also started that summer in the false expectation that I might actually understand it. So this was a great thing to turn to. I did since read and finish Vanity Fair many years later, but it's not The Nomad of Time. It's not The Warlord of the Air. So I devoured this book, or 3 books, I should say. And at that point, I was hooked. The next year, I went on a class trip to England and Scotland. And we went into some bookstore in London. I don't remember which one it was. Nothing that was a hole in the wall. It was a typical big budget chain bookstore. And they had tons more of these Grafton books. And I just grabbed them all. I grabbed so many that I had to buy a new bag, and they were just incredibly heavy. I had to Hawk Moon Coram, Dancers at the End of Time, Cornelius Chronicles, and I think Behold the Man, Breakfast in the Ruins. I was just Gloriana. I was just stuffing them into my bag. So I read them over the next 10 years. I, in fact, felt that many of them I really didn't understand, even the easier to get ones. Now that I'm older and reading them again since discovering your podcast, I'm realizing just what I thought when I was a kid was oftentimes schlocky pulp turns out to be deeply hip and ironic, and stuff that I wouldn't have known as a kid. It's stuff I'm getting now as an adult. So, I went off Moorcock for a while, but I came back on, and I'm really enjoying it. It's like when people, I should say, it's like when people talk about, Star Wars, it's such a candy cane or a bubble gum, kind of pulp thing. I say, you guys don't understand. It's a really hip update of the kind of stuff that my dad used to watch that would be the featurettes before the main event in the movies, right? Yeah. Flash Gordon, Larry Buster Crabbe, I think he was Buck Rogers, right? Yeah. Like Star Wars is in essence running that through the hip mixer.
I think Buster Crabbe even played Tarzan at one point.
He may have. I know about Weissmuller.
Pre-Weissmuller, I think Buster Crabbe might have done a Tarzan movie. Yeah, so he was right up to his ears in that genre stuff, wasn't he, Buster Crabbe? Yeah, it's funny because I think we might have discussed this before, but you hitting The Nomad of Time as your first Moorcock and then thinking, wow, this is good stuff.
Yeah,
I was in a similar place because I can't remember to this day which one came first. I think I might have got them both at the same time off Pops. And I got the Ace pocketbook edition of Stormbringer, and I got my Ace edition of The Warlord of the Air.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which now I have to come clean. This isn't the version I got off Pops because that is held together with spit and sticky tape.
Right.
So this is a copy that I found in a second-hand shop, which was in much better condition and able to be read, which is the first or second Moorcock I read, but I will have read them probably back to back. So kicking off with The Warlord of the Air and Stormbringer was the best way to kick off reading Moorcock by a country mile.
Yeah, because you had two very different heroes. Yeah, totally different writing style.
Oh, good God, yeah. And having it's not come out at the time of recording this, but the last episode that I recorded was City of the Beast, which was his Edgar Rice Burroughs pastiche, Cain of Old Mars. And had I read that first, there's every chance I might not have gone back to Moorcock.
You don't like Cain, the Cain books?
It's I'm not going to spoil anything. Well, I won't be spoiling anything because that podcast will come out before this one. It's not his best work, I would say. And some of the tropes within that, he writes this 6 years later and does them a million times better.
Yeah, no, that's true. I read the Cain books in a very uncritical way.
Yeah,
a few years ago, and I I took them for what I assumed they were at the time, which was just his attempt to do the old time, early 20th century romp, right? But I was very impressed though in his introduction to the edition I have, and I don't remember which one it is, in which he said that I believe his father told him that this is his
He
favorite.
did. That's right.
I thought it was really sweet.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, I did read that, and I thought, well, his father left when he was very young, and I'm not entirely sure he had the best relationship with his father. So, whether there was a hint of irony to that or not, I really don't know.
Quite
But
possibly.
I read City of the Beast as a teenager, round about the same time I was reading the Edgar Rice Burroughs books, and they did not compare favourably.
Wow.
But that's a story for another time. So it's worth dwelling for a moment on where Mike was at this stage in his career. So he's effectively only about 10 years into his career as a published author when he writes this, which is baffling, really, because we think about Moorcock as 80-plus-year-old like monolith with all of these books behind him, but he's still really, really young in his career here. His influences are well known by this point. He was a huge Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. He read The Sword and Sorcery of Robert E. Howard, although his opinions on Howard shifted slightly as he matured.
Right.
And we discussed some of that in our episode on Wizardry and Wild Romance a few years ago. But he was also a rabid consumer and collector of the old Victorian scientific romance and speculative fiction that appeared in magazines and papers before and after the turn of the 20th century. Talked about some of that, of course, in our episode on his edited collection Before Armageddon with Liam last year or the year before. So this sequence of stories, beginning with The Warlord of the Air, very much grow out of that. It's got shades of H.G. Wells, of course, particularly The World Set Free, but also Chesney's The Battle of Dorking, which we talked about in that episode.
Which I read because you shared with me that collection.
Yes. It's a really good collection. Yeah. I still haven't got round to reread. I read England Invaded, the second collection, probably 30 years ago, and I still haven't got round to that.
Some of it drags. Some of it's very much, kill the Kaiser kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, the Germans are definitely the bad guys. It reminded me of Humphrey on Yes Minister regarding the French.
Yeah. There's also some of George Griffith's The Angel of the Revolution in here as well.
Yes.
But we need to have a conversation about versions, because you've got the Grafton edition, omnibus edition from the 80s, which I also had. It's the second time I read Warlord of the Air, I read that same Grafton edition that you have, and was puzzled by some of the differences. Now, fortunately, we have John Davies' brilliant website, Moorcography, which is absolutely fantastic. If you ever wonder about Moorcock editions, who the cover artists were, Moorcography is an absolutely fantastic website. So John Davies is Moorcock's bibliographer, also the guy who runs Jade Design, which is a treasure trove of Moorcock stuff. But Warlord is quite an unusual example of a Mike book that it's not unusual for Moorcock to revise his stories over time. And we know that, we've talked about that. But Warlord's an unusual example of a Mike book that was subject to unauthorized changes and edits to the text. So weirdly, and this is a bit confusing to follow, but try and stay with us with this one, listeners. First US edition, published in 1971 by Ace, is the original unedited text. That's the first one I ever read. The first English editions were all edited by the publishing house editors, and that carried over into all subsequent US and English editions through the 70s and into the 80s. So that includes the Daw paperbacks in the 70s.
Yep, I had the Elric ones.
Yeah.
The Daw ones, yeah.
Yeah, so the Warlord of the Air editions were the unauthorized edited versions. So it wasn't until the Millennium edition in the UK and the White Wolf edition in the USA, this one.
Yes, I've seen that one.
This is well worth getting for a couple of reasons. One is it's the original unedited versions collected under this title, No Matter the Time Streams. And also, it's described as minor textual amendments, but it also includes an expanded version of the Steel Tsar.
Ah, okay. Well, and that's right. And I get a lot out of that book. That's a book that each time I read it, it grows on me in ways that I didn't quite expect.
Yeah. So when we get to covering the Steel Tsar, we'll maybe look at some of the textual differences between the original version and the expanded version. But the other reason this is well worth having is because the cover artist, I think it's Chris Moeller, he also, this is the only edition that has his pencil sketches.
Yes, and that one Zeppelin in the foreground, is rather similar to the one that's on the cover of mine, which is
Yeah.
this sort of moody picture of cloudy skies with the Zeppelin and these almost fins, if you
Mm.
want to call them that, that look like they're practically organic.
Yeah. And in the book, these are purported to be the personal sketchbook of Oswald Bastable.
Oh,
And
nice.
there's loads of them. It's absolutely beautiful, and I like the Chris Moeller cover as well. It's a little bit too square jawed, perhaps,
It's a
but
little deco
nevertheless,
almost.
yes. And it's a fantastic volume, and the Millennium Edition doesn't have those illustrations, so it's a really lovely volume to
Yeah,
have.
I'm definitely going to look for a copy of that.
Yeah. So they were published under the title The Nomad of the Time Streams. And finally, they were recollected again in 2014 in the Galanx collections and again reverted back to the Nomad of Time,
Mm.
which means they've got exactly the same book title as your Grafton edition, but they are the complete texts and the most complete versions of the stories. So, yeah, it's all a little bit confusing. But my reading copy, I'm actually using the Titan edition for one simple reason: print size.
I was just about to say large text for old people.
Exactly that. Yeah, easy readers version.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I'm wearing progressive lenses, which I feel a little silly using this term. I think I would just rather say bifocals, but I think technically
bifocals.
that's not correct. But
Yeah, yeah,
but the thing about the entire series, when you think about Warlord of the Air and the way I mean, even if it was the first thing that I'd read by him, when I started to understand the chronology slightly better
mm,
and I still don't quite understand it, of when he wrote what, and when I was reading these half-naked slave girl type fantasy stuff, or at least that's what some of the
yeah,
covers would lead you to believe these were about, I was getting to a point where I was feeling a little bit too cool for fantasy, right?
yeah,
And what I liked about The Nomad of Time, all three books, is that I like it when anybody who's in a sort of genre that's, sort of pigeonholed into sci-fi or fantasy takes on something that's more rooted in historical reality or
mm,
contemporary reality, which is why, for the same reason, I really dug the Cornelius Chronicles, those four books, even if I thought, what the fuck is going on here? Especially,
yeah,
I mean, because you start reading A Cure for Cancer, and I think I read that before I read William S. Burroughs. And I have to say that I found Burroughs a little easier to decipher.
yeah,
Right? But the English Assassin, Condition of Muzak, all of which they all get into very swinging London, but what we would still call contemporary and
yeah,
grounded sort of in a reality, right? As opposed to flying cats and six-legged dogs and
sure.
spaceships and
Mm,
and pardon me for saying this, but the Terraphiles, which I just didn't like. But I was digging this strange our world but not our world aspect to this blending weird and sometimes rather orientalist spooky history
mm,
with political commentary set in an alternate world. Like, to me, that has always been a very sweet spot for me to sit in,
yeah,
and I'm really happy and grateful that somebody thought of it, and
yeah,
and it was Michael.
yeah. Well, if we go down the route of talking about speculative fiction instead of science fiction, there's like another level we can go to with that kind of stuff, where
There are
we
people who do it who I don't think carry it off, even if they're good writers. And rather than enumerate what I consider their drawbacks, I would rather focus on what I think Moorcock does well, which is he has, despite all his his negative views about the state of eternal war with small moments of of peace as a punctuation mark, I detect so much pleasure and fun that that in a sense that he was doing what I wish more people would do, which is he appeared to be writing the book that he wanted to read.
yeah.
And
Well, what we can't forget with Moorcock is, whilst he's trying to do serious things and deal with serious, heady themes, much like he does in the Cornelius novels, and he would do much more strongly with things like the Piat Quartet in the
yes,
80s and 90s, is he's also at heart a caper writer. He's an adventure writer. He
Yes.
loved that stuff as a kid, and that's what got him into writing in the first place.
Yeah.
So because he maybe wants to stretch the boundaries, and he always stretched the boundaries of the form, he's still writing cracking good adventures.
Yes.
You know, certainly at this stage and through the 70s. I mean, bloody hell, you mentioned A Cure for Cancer. I'm still waiting for Hussein to get back to me 4 years later after sending him a hardcover copy of that and saying, "Oh, we're going to talk about this." He said, "You know what? I've been reading a couple of pages at the time, and what the fuck?"
Yeah, you have to take it really. It's like I tell people when they tell me they're reading Moby Dick and they're really snowed under by it. I always tell them, don't read it like a normal book.
Yeah.
One chapter at a time. They're written short for a reason.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot to absorb.
Yeah. I mean, I think I might have to get a ringer, because I don't think I'll ever get Cure for Cancer done with Hussein, to be honest. So I'll find something else to do with Hussein. Although, funnily enough, I did send him a book of sci-fi stories written by Palestinian authors. So maybe if he ever gets to reading them, we might be able to do an episode on that, but we'll see. We'll see. I don't often do recently written things, but I think that would be quite an interesting one.
Over the time I've listened to your podcast, I've put myself in the fantasy position of what happens if what would happen if I were called upon to do a critical analysis of A Cure for Cancer, and each time I begin to think about it, I think I have no fucking idea. All I can think of is great big section in the early part of the book that just says and I think that's how I feel about the book.
Yeah, you see, I'm blaming Hussein for all of this, but it's not like I've really put my foot down on this in the last 4 years, because holy shit, where do you start? But anyway,
you're a wise man in many ways.
Yeah, not many, but occasionally I have my moments. So what are we dealing here with Warlord of the Air? Well, we've got our two chief tropes from the outset, haven't we? We've got the protagonist displaced to a wondrous or bizarre world, Alice in Wonderland style, like the Mars Tales of Edgar Rice Burroughs. I discovered recently that Japanese media culture has a really nice name for it. And I don't know how you pronounce it, isekai. I had never heard of that until it was mentioned on a Mr. Sunday Movies video on The Wizard of Oz. In manga, the character who's displaced into a strange or fantastical or weird world. And then, of course, the other trope is we've got that framing device. The Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter stories, of course, something very similar. And the Bastable stories, Bastable relates his tale to Moorcock's granddad. And I think there are other examples of this. I certainly don't think Edgar Rice Burroughs kicked it off. Now, I've never read Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King, but the unnamed journalist in the story receives the story of Danny Dravett and Peachy Tolliver Carnahan. And I've seen the film, of course, because it's Christopher Plummer plays the journalist.
I have a copy of the novel in the very next room behind me.
It's one I've always meant to read, but I've just never, ever, ever got round to it. Of course, this is slightly different thanks to the nature of the tale not involving Mars or time travel, but nevertheless, there's the element of tall story that's heightened further, like in the John Huston film version as well. And Mike's already done this, as we mentioned, in the Michael Caine stories, and we covered that. So, let's get into it, because each of my editions carries a slightly different dedication. So the Ace edition is dedicated to Julie.
Right.
What's yours?
For Julie, followed by one of his linchpin quotations attributed to Prince Lobkowitz.
Yeah.
Right? The war is ceaseless. The most we can hope for are occasional moments of tranquility in the midst of the conflict.
Oh, cheer up, Lobkowitz.
It's a keeper. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a barrel of laughs. It never fails to impress the ladies either.
Yeah. This is the first time Lobkowitz ever appears in Moorcock, of course, in The Warlord of the Air, but he will appear many, many more times over subsequent stories in the 70s and 80s.
He was a Cornelius occasional appearance, I believe.
I think he pops up in Cornelius stories. He pops up in, I think he's in The Brothel in Rosenstrasse.
Well, I haven't read that.
I think...
City in the Autumn Stars, or one of these.
City in the Autumn Stars. Possibly also The Warhound and the World's Pain.
Yeah, the books.
Yes, he pops up in all of those. My Titan edition says, for Michael Cornelius Dempsey, who died as he had lived a captain of his own ship.
That's right, which is essentially a spoiler about this very book.
I had no idea who that was back in the day, but all will be revealed. And the White Wolf edition also includes dedications to Steve Biko and Malcolm X as well.
Oh, nice. It's appropriate.
Yeah. So we've got our framing device, which starts with Moorcock's editor's note. And let's have a look at that. So, editor's note. I never met my grandfather, Michael Moorcock, and knew very little of him until my grandmother's death last year when I was given a box of his papers by my father. These seems to be more in your line than mine, he said. I didn't know we had another scribbler in the family. Most of the papers were diaries, the beginnings of essays or short stories, some conventional Edwardian poetry, and a typewritten manuscript which, without further comment, we publish here, perhaps a little later than he would have hoped. Michael Moorcock, Ladbroke Grove, London, January 1971. And it's a little bit of fun, isn't it? It adds that layer of intrigue and mystery. And I unashamedly nicked this from our lazy Bastable rip-off fan fiction, by the way.
I
We'll
noticed, and I mean, no, but I appreciate that because
Yeah.
that's not nicking, that's an homage.
Yeah, digging through Pops's belongings and finding the journal of Gerard Arthur Conway.
Well, I'm a sucker for a framing device, and it's in writing that I have completed but not published. I rely a little heavily on it.
Yeah.
I have to kill those darlings before I show them to the public.
Yeah, and by its very nature, we also get the point where, okay, is this narrator reliable? He's just relating a tale to our chap who's recording everything and writing everything down. So that always introduces a layer of intrigue and mystery as well.
Well, and that's the funny thing because he likes the framing device so much that he has two of them. It's a nesting doll. It's Moorcock introducing. Oh wait, am I getting this? No, it's Moorcock introducing his grandfather.
Yeah,
and then the grandfather frames Oswald.
And this is what I mean about this being so much better an example of this than City of the Beast.
Yes.
Where in City of the Beast, you get the guy who meets the guy, and the guy's like, oh, yeah, this mysterious Frenchman taught me fencing.
That's
and
right.
then some magical experiment, and I ended up on Mars, and it all happens very quickly. This is much more satisfying. And when you kick off with a book one titled How an English Officer Entered the World of the Future and What He Saw There, and chapter one subtitled The Opium Eater of Roe Island.
I'm hooked.
Well, you know what? No wonder I was instantly hooked as a teen because this is what I want to read.
Yeah, that's exactly. This is the kind of stuff that inspired me to want to write.
Yeah, and the opening, as written by Moorcock's grandfather, is wonderful, and the tone and voice do a really good job of imitating that of the old Morris and Griffiths and Wells-style narratives of that Englishman abroad in 1903. I'd love to read it all, but we'll be here all night. But suffice to say, he explains his arrival on the beautiful but remote Indian Ocean volcanic island of Roe Island. But I will just read a little bit of the description. Get my glasses on. Built around the harbour is a largish town which, as you approach it, resembles nothing so much as a prosperous Devon fishing village, until you see the Malay and Chinese buildings behind the facades of the hotels and offices which line the quayside. There is room in the harbour for several good-sized steamers and a number of sailing vessels, principally native dhows and junks, which are used for fishing. Further up the hill you can see the workings of the mines which employ the greatest part of the population, which is Malay and Chinese labourers and their wives and families. Prominent on the quayside are the warehouses and offices of the Welland Rock Phosphate Mining Company and the great white and gold facade of the Royal Harbour Hotel, of which the proprietor is one Minhir Olmeyer, a Dutchman from Surabaya. There are also an almost ungodly numbers of missions, Buddhist temples, Malay mosques, and shrines of more mysterious origin. There are several less ornate hotels than Olmeyer's, and there are general stores, sheds and buildings which serve the tiny railway which brings the ore down from the mountains and along the quayside. There are 3 hospitals, 2 of which are for natives only. I say natives in the loose sense. There were no natives of any sort before the island was settled 30 years ago by the people who founded the Welland firm. All labour was brought from the peninsula, mainly from Singapore. On a hill to the south of the harbour, standing rather aloof from the town and dominating it, is the residence of the official representative, Brigadier Bland, together with the barracks which house the small garrison of native police under the command of a very upright servant of the Empire, Lieutenant Begg. Over this spick-and-span collection of whitewashed stucco flies a proud Union Jack, symbol of protection and justice to all who dwell on the island.
And may I say, just at this point, Lieutenant Begg in my version is Lieutenant Alsop.
That's right, because Begg, being an anglicisation of Von Beck that appeared in later Moorcock novels, particularly the detective Sir Seaton Begg in The Metatemporal Detective, something we'll get to in 2037 if I last that long. But yeah, so this is one of the examples of Moorcock just littering in a few Easter eggs, as the kids call it these days.
Do you think he owes money to the Von Beck? Well, there's a lot of this happening.
From memory,
and it's a long time since I've read the Millennium Edition, which has the updated text. I think a Count von Beck appears in one of the later novels.
I'll have to check.
Yeah. We'll get to that one day, but it certainly obviously isn't in the earlier ones because the von Becks didn't arrive until Warhound and the World's Pain.
Now, what I want to do, meanwhile, though, is compliment something. I'm not gonna give you a big paragraph, but you can see him, and this is always the thing which impresses me with people like Moorcock. When you're writing something that's going to be patently fiction, but you need this semblance of credibility because you're setting it on Earth. He says, Roe Island has no business to be where it is. There is nothing near it. There is nothing to indicate that it is there. You come upon it suddenly, rising out of the water like the tip of some vast underwater mountain. And you know, it's the perfect thing for no matter how rational you are, or no matter how rational I am, to then think, wouldn't that be just something?
Yeah.
Be out there in the middle of nowhere and to come across an island that has no business being there. He's making it work. And it really impresses me. And he also is setting the scene in little ways. In the paragraph that you were looking at, he says there are almost an ungodly number of missions, Buddhist temples, Malay mosques, and shrines of more mysterious origin.
Yeah.
And when you feel that very effective and economical use of language, digging at something that is going to be older than old.
Yeah.
That's
terrific,
where that's where I get the goosebumps, and I think, okay, we're going somewhere really cool.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrific, and it reminds me very strongly of a lot of those older films. We'll talk about one specifically in a wee while, but even Skull Island in King Kong, that idea that this is set at a time where we potentially hadn't discovered every Roe Island in the world yet. There was still an element of mystery to it all. There was still a sense that there may be, like in Lovecraft, there may be a mountain range in the Antarctic. We just didn't know. We just didn't know at this point. And Moorcock captures some of the mystery and the wonder of all that, but then he overlays it with the banality of being populated by English people.
Yes.
Which shortly afterwards, where it says, unless you are fond of paying an endless succession of social calls on other English people, most of whom can only talk of mining or of missions, there's not a great deal to do on Roe Island. There's an amateur dramatic society, which puts on a play at the official representative's residence every Christmas. There's a club of sorts where one may play billiards if invited by the oldest members. I was invited once, but played rather badly. The local newspapers from Singapore, Sarawak or Sydney are almost always at least a fortnight old when you can find them. The Times is a month to 6 weeks old, and the illustrated weeklies and monthly journals from home can be anything up to 6 months behind by the time you see them. This sparsity of up-to-date news is, of course, a very good thing for a man recovering from exhaustion. It is hard to get hot under the collar about a war which has been over a month or two before you read about it, or a stock market tremor which has resolved itself one way or the other by the previous week.
It's perfect.
You're forced to relax. After all, there's nothing you can do to alter the course of what has become history. But it is when you've begun to recover your energy, both mental and physical, that you begin to realise how bored you are. And within 2 months, this realisation has struck me most forcibly. I began to nurse a rather evil hope that something would happen on Roe Island. An explosion in the mine, an earthquake, or perhaps even a native uprising.
You can see in this hoping something would happen, a what I would only imagine to be a very intentional wave of the hand to his buddy Jimmy Ballard.
Yeah.
Whose books are full of people wishing something would happen and then making it happen with terrible consequences.
Yeah. Well, if you wanted a little bit of intrigue and something interesting, well, he gets it, doesn't he? Funnily enough, over the years, I've said on multiple occasions to people that I've always harboured this secret fantasy that not that secret because I tell people, but I've always harboured this kind of fantasy that I wanted to take a tramp steamer in a filthy old linen suit and sit at a swaying bar drinking and smoking myself to an early grave.
With
and
a cigarette.
end up somewhere like Roe Island.
Or
I think, smoking cheroots, yeah. And I think this book, as well as a host of old films, is responsible for that, because speaking of a filthy linen suit, Moorcock Sr. takes to haunting the docks for some kind of stimulation when he comes across such a fella. And it's a combination of those old films and this idea of Bastable being kicked off this ship, looking like a wreck, a bearded, filthy, linen-suited wreck, It's absolutely wonderful. It's so vivid because the ship, the Maria Carlson, this battered old ship, is bringing ashore provisions, and he inquires of a ship's mate if they're carrying any mail. And the ship's mate said, "Mail, mail." He offered me a look of hatred and contempt, which I took for a negative reply to my question.
I love it.
Then he rushed back up the gangplank and disappeared. I waited, however, in the hope of seeing the captain and confirming with him that there was indeed no mail. Then I saw a white man appear at the top of the gangplank, pausing and staring blankly around him as if he had not expected to find land on the other side of the rail at all. Someone gave him a shove from behind and he staggered down the bouncing plank, fell at the bottom, and picked himself up in time to catch the small sea bag which the mate threw to him from the ship. The man was dressed in a filthy linen suit, had no hat, no shirt, he was unshaven, and there were native sandals on his feet. I had seen his type before. Some wretch whom the East had ruined, who had discovered a weakness within himself which he might never have found if he had stayed safely at home in England. As he straightened up, however, I was startled by an expression of intense misery in his eyes, a certain dignity of bearing which was not at all common in the type. He shouldered his bag and began to make his way toward the town. Moorcock's prose is so cinematic. You can see Richard Todd playing this guy in 1956 in like a Technicolor movie. It's absolutely wonderful.
And I note also in that passage, he also advances a bit of a challenge, to the reader, because a shape of things to come here, because he has that phrase, "After all, there is nothing you can do to alter the course of what has become history." I would beg to differ.
This book's not even got past the framing device yet.
Yep.
And it's better than City of the Beast.
Yes.
Just this chapter alone, the world building, the setting, the language, the prose, the narrative, the introduction to the character. Oh, it's fabulous. So, recognising something of a cultivated man beneath the shabbiness, Moorcock takes the fella, who has a lost and tormented look, and follows timidly to his lodgings at the Almayer Hotel. He gives him a drink, has his houseboy, Ramdas, because of course, this is
Ramdas.
Yeah, Ramdas is a Christian convert, beloved of the local missionaries. He bathes, shaves, and clothes him, and Ramdas sees it as a perfect example of Christian charity. He also tips off Moorcock Senior to the existence of the man's opium pipe. And following extensive dialogue, he introduces himself as Captain Oswald Bastable, late of the 53rd Lancers, but also an opium-addicted madman, for who would believe in 1903 that he was also Oswald Bastable, airshipman, who had flown airships at 100 miles per hour in the year 1973. And as is the form with these kind of devices, Moorcock Senior agrees to hear his tale, and we're off to the races.
I want to point out, by the way, that what I'm always impressed by with these old movies and with books that deal with that time is that he might be filthy, he might be a junkie, he might be on the ends of the earth and at the end of his tether, but he's still wearing a suit.
And he's instantly recognised by another gentleman as a man of cultivation.
But of course, like Gunga Din.
Yeah. Because, like can always recognise like.
Yes.
A gentleman can always recognise a gentleman in this kind of like Victorian scenario of being abroad in the world, a world of houseboys and missionaries and native workers working in mines. You know what? Doesn't matter how filthy and bearded this white man is. I recognise a man of cultivation when I see him. Oh,
exactly. And we'll note, by the way, that Mynheer Olmeyer is not such a man of cultivation. More about him in a few years.
Yeah. So our protagonist also is classic Moorcock, isn't he? Haunted, opium-addicted, despairing, adrift, everything a teenager would respond to.
Yes. Just look at me now.
Yeah.
I'm on an island in the middle of nowhere.
Of course.
Just saying.
Yeah. Now, you've got to tell us briefly, because, of course, you're restoring a house.
Oh, yes.
On the Azores, right?
That's correct.
So just give us a quick 2-minute précis of what it's like on the Azores.
Right. Well, so I'll tell you actually. I'll tell you something tangential to that, but maybe with a bit of a relationship to these books. The way I came to be here, the very short version is that my, again, it involves grandparents. My grandmother and her second husband, who I knew as my grandfather for many years before I learned that I had another one. Yeah. They grew up in wartime Nazi Germany, and my grandfather was in the German army. He saw action and was injured quite badly at Stalingrad and survived. And in the 1950s, he and my grandmother made a decision to take 5 daughters and stepdaughters and emigrate to the United States, where they were getting a sponsorship from, I believe it was a general or some other kind of officer in the army for whom my grandmother had done translations after the war.
Yeah.
And so they eventually they settled in a number of places, but eventually they settled in on Cape Cod in the United States, in the island of Martha's Vineyard, and that's an area where there are many people who were descended from or Azorian Portuguese immigrants from the whaling days. They were whalers often on the British and American ships.
Yeah.
And so it was, and in fact, even now on Martha's Vineyard, where I live when I'm in America, Portuguese remains the second language of the island. So because there's a large influx of Brazilians and Cabo Verdeans. In any case, my grandparents made friends with some people whose parents or grandparents had come from these islands. They started visiting here in the 1960s during the dictatorship. And eventually in the 1986, they bought a house. I visited them in 1999 along with my family for their 50th wedding anniversary and absolutely fell in love with the place. I bought myself a textbook. I taught myself Portuguese. And I came back for vacations for a few weeks at a time for years after that. When my grandparents died, this house and the property were there was no will associated with them, so everything went to probate court, and nobody seemed very interested in taking on the shitty legal work of having to resolve inheritance and ownership among a number of descendants. So I made a proposal that I would buy them out and take over the house. Have it open to the family still, but really take over the assets and the liabilities. So I did so, and I started on a major renovation a few years ago with a nice fellow who lives here, who knows a crew of people who've been doing really nice work on the place, because it was falling apart. I don't mean to say that you couldn't live in it, but it was a faded beauty. It would have been right at home in Roe Island. And so there's a new kitchen. I'm putting in a new bathroom. I'm putting a private apartment in on the ground floor. I'm making the upstairs livable because it didn't used to be. There's just tons and tons of work going on here in the place. But after 27 years of coming here, I'm feeling really good to see the house begin to have new life in it again. And what are the islands like? In a very short word, there are 9 of them here. They all have similarities, but many differences. They're very lush and green. All the life is around the coasts because they're volcanic islands. And when you go into the highlands, they are again green and lush, full of cattle. And in the summertime, the stone walls are decorated with hydrangeas for miles and miles. So that, they're absolutely gorgeous to see from the air. But they're very isolated up there, foggy. The weather changes every 5 minutes, on many days. And in fact, on my island, in the backyard is a 2,351 meter high volcano, the highest point in Portugal. That's 7,700 feet, give or take, in the U.S. measures. And it's just sitting right back up there, just looming over this house all the damn time. And from the volcano down to the deep blue sea is no more than 2 miles. So it's a bit wild. You can see forever. The outside my bedroom window, the next land is Antarctica. So it's nowhere.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to visit one day in a filthy linen suit.
Yes, you are.
The filthiest possible. Yeah. It sounds wonderful. So yeah, filthy linen suits. And unfortunately, I probably can't come on a tramp steamer, which is a shame. I might not look so good stepping off a plane in a filthy linen suit.
My grandparents used to sail here from New Bedford, Massachusetts on the Pauline Marie.
Wow.
7-day trip. Yes. So
I have said to Phil that when we retire, we need to find the most weird and circuitous route to get around and sail somewhere, because we did look at one point because I've always had this obsession with being a filthy weirdo on a tramp steamer. I was looking at like the possibilities for sailing that don't mean like the QE2 or something similar, and some big cargo ships and super tankers actually rent out cabins.
They do, and there's a subculture of people who live this life, and I'm looking for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you eat with the crew and the captain, and you just
And you watch VHS video cassettes.
Oh, I want to take my sports bag full of books,
right?
And I want that trip
Yeah.
so desperately. You know what, Phil? Not so keen. Not so keen.
Tell her I'll be there.
Yeah, one day. Yeah,
we'll go to Pitcairn Island. Go to Adamstown.
Yeah,
really somewhere that's far away, or Tristan da Cunha, or somewhere nuts.
I'm one of those weird people who, when I saw The Thing in the 80s, I was like, oh, I'd quite like to live on an Antarctic research station.
With Wilford Brimley.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything up until including the Thing arriving. Yeah, quite up for everything else.
I will say that the Thing I find a very appealing movie, but as far as movies that are just unremittingly not gonna give you any hope, it's right up there with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the Philip Kaufman one. With Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, right? I mean, or anything by Michael Haneke, Funny Games.
Funny Games,
insane movies that once was enough. I'm never going to watch them twice. About Bastable here, and I have to say, and it's another thing that appeals to me, ever since I had that first trip out of the United States, I've always wanted to be away. I've always wanted to go somewhere else. And the problem, and part of why I joined Reuters is because I wanted to, go to hot and dusty places and that were dangerous and write about them. The problem, of course, is that's well, first of all, the opportunities never came my way. I did my time in India, but it was a different kind of assignment. But the thing that I keep having to remind myself of is that Bastable, as such as he's described in the opening pages of this book, may be living the life I want. Really not a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I might say don't knock it till you've tried it. On the other hand, he's not in good shape.
But this is one of the reasons why it is so intriguing.
Yes.
For people of that mindset. And I know, when Pops was reading these books in the 60s and 70s, there was part of his brain, I'm sure, that was reading these for the kind of escapism because they appealed to him as where he wanted to be.
Well, because if you can get rid of if you can somehow leach out the self-pity. And by the way, I'm currently listening on your podcast to the Phoenix and Obsidian Part 2 episode, so there's self-pity there.
Oh, it's all there, yeah.
But if you can get rid of that somehow, so that you don't look like I'll use an American term, so you don't look like a dweeb, especially to hot chicks who want the thrill of the romance of the haunted person, but without all the yakety yak.
Yeah.
It's the perfect setup. Like I even remember thinking back in the old days when I was younger, I wish I could be haunted one day.
There's a reason why 95% of our patrons are blokes. It's because we all identify with this, whereas women would read this and say, "This guy's a fucking tool."
But incredibly romantic notions, though, and I don't mean I mean romantic like in the romantics, literature. This kind of thing where something has damaged him so much that this is the way he copes. And in fact, Bastable, unlike many of Moorcock's other Eternal Champion manifestations, and I'm assuming Bastable might count as an Eternal Champion, I don't know. It doesn't matter if he does or if he doesn't. Bastable, probably because of his drug addiction, appears to have zero self-pity, almost no self-regard.
Intriguingly, though, I think that's absolutely the case. He is the most appealing for me, of the haunted, opium-addicted, despairing, adrift Moorcock characters, because as we'll find as we proceed, is not a massive tool.
No.
Whereas most of the others, probably Coram aside, a large proportion of the time are just unbelievable tools.
Like Piat.
Yeah, like Piat. Like, I mean, Elric's a bit of a tool.
There's a reason it rhymes with twat.
Yeah. Hawkmoon's a tool. Ericos is a terrible tool.
I'm afraid so.
Oh, good lord, yeah. So, I mean, we get into Bastable's account now, don't we? The temple at Teku Benga, because Bastable relays his account to Moorcock Senior, in which he explains his presence as a captain in the Lancers on an expedition to the fiercely independent and occasionally rebellious Himalayan kingdom of Kumbhalari. The Kumbhalari don't like the British Empire because they're put outposts in their territory and they've attacked them. So he goes up there in command of detachments of Punjabi cavalry and Gurkha infantry. And what I really love is he has these 2 seasoned commanders, Rizaldar Janab Shah and Subadar J.K. Bisht. They're very wary of the Kumbalaris and their leader, Sharan Kang. And en route to Kang's capital, Teku Benga, they see occasional scouts observing them, and over dinner in Bastable's tent they discuss tactics and agree to pause for a day or so to see if they're approached and to gauge the reaction to the presence. Now, I love all this. It's very Kipling. It feels very authentic.
Yep.
But I also appreciate that Moorcock instantly lays out that Bastable has this easy, trusting relationship with his Punjabi and Gurkha colleagues.
That's
And
right.
he respects their experience and abilities. It establishes his character very quickly and neatly, and it foreshadows how his worldview will shift as the book goes on in relation to colonial peoples,
That's
the
right.
oppressed peoples,
That is
and
right.
particularly in the second half of the book.
Well, yes, and in fact, Moorcock himself in the framing device on Roe Island doesn't comment on the white man's superiority to the coolies. He just mentions that they're there, right? He's a very even-handed thing, but of course, Bastable in the beginning doesn't quite share that view because he comes from the tradition, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll say as a side note, by the way, that I can't remember the name of the mountain he mentions, but he says that Teku Benga is near this very tall mountain, and it's a lightly rewritten version of Mount Kanchan. I think it's Kanchenjunga, but I don't remember the exact name of the mountain. But it is a real mountain. It's a very tall mountain, and so you can almost place where Teku Benga is supposed to be. It's right there around what is the current Indian state and the former Indian kingdom of Sikkim, Sikkim, which is right next to, like, east of Nepal, south of China, west of Bhutan, and the Indian state of Assam, right? And then the modern state, of course, of Bangladesh. So it's right up in like near Cooch Behar, which Saki used to write about in his stories, in a very satirical way and a racist way as well. But right there in what the Indians call the chicken neck. So it's up there where the terrain is extremely forbidding, which I love.
Yeah, it's great. It's great across the board. And when I'm reading this as a teen, I'm thinking, oh, this guy's really cool. Not only does he have a detachment of Bengal lancers and he hangs out with their chief, but also he's got this Gurkha troop.
That's right.
Because, of course, it's quite well known in the UK how highly respected and prized Gurkha troops have always been in the British Army.
Especially after their World War I sacrifices in France.
I think whilst we can talk about how Gurkhas have almost a mythical status in the British Army, despite the poor treatment they've had over the years in terms of pay and conditions, which we probably need to just, highlight. Some of the fights they've undergone to actually achieve parity with regular troops, that's something that's less well known, perhaps.
That's right.
Funnily enough, Joanna Lumley was one of the people who championed that, strangely enough. Through the courts. Yeah.
Yes, now that you remind me, how often do I think of Joanna Lumley? Not often, but yes, now that you mention it.
So, and while modern Gurkha troops have achieved that parity thanks to legal wranglings, there's still a lot of work to be done because there's a lot of older British Army pensioners from the Gurkha regiment who still haven't had things sorted out. But yeah, Gurkhas, to anybody listening who's perhaps not aware of, outside of the UK, who's not aware of it, the Gurkhas are almost they are legendary soldiers in the British Army who go through literally hell and high water to get their opportunity to serve in the British Army. And when they do, they go back to their home country and they're hugely respected for the service that they've done. It's something that dates back a long, long time. But yeah. Anyway, they're approached the following day by the Kumbalaris, and their priest king Sharan Kang is with them at the head, and they parley. And we have to say from the very outset, Sharan Kang sounds like a bit of a rotter, doesn't he?
He's yes, and beyond the sort of the sound of those particular combinations of vowels and consonants, he's highly dangerous, completely untrustworthy, and on top of that, he's an asshole. He's an asshole.
Yeah, he's a proper asshole, and
he seems like he could be approximately 50 billion years old.
Yeah, it's and Bastable says, I must admit I felt a shiver run through me as he spoke. I could almost believe that he was the powerful sorcerer they claimed him to be. Such an ancient people must also therefore be wise. I tried to stare back into those cruel, intelligent eyes, and a wise people would not anger the King Emperor, meaning, the king of the British Empire. And Sharon Kang says, a wise people know that it must protect itself against the wolf, Sharon Kang said, a faint smile curving his lips. And the British wolf is a singularly rapacious beast, Captain Bastable. It has eaten well in the lands of the south and the west, has it not? Soon it will turn its eyes towards Cumbalari. Now, fair point, Sharon Kang. Fair point, but he's definitely being coded as an Oriental villain.
What you mistake for a wolf is really a lion, I said. Now you have to do that. You know what? You do that. You do the British part, because what am I going to do? Pretend?
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, I'm sure Sharon Kang didn't sound like he was from Hull, so it's not a massive problem. But yeah, just say what you mistake for a wolf is really a lion. I said, trying not to show I was impressed by the fact that he had known my name. A lion which brings peace, security, justice to those it chooses to protect. A lion which knows that Cumbalari does not need its protection. The conversation continued in these rather convoluted terms for some time before Sharon Kang grew visibly impatient and said suddenly,
Why are so many soldiers come to our land?
Because you attacked our frontier station and killed our men, I said.
Because you put your frontier station inside our boundaries.
Sharon Kang made a strange gesture in the air.
We're not a greedy people. We have no need to be. We do not hunger for land like the Westerners, for we know that land is not important when a man's soul is capable of ranging the universe. You may come to Tekubenga, where all gods preside, and there I will tell you what you may say to this upstart barbarian lion who dignifies himself with grandiose titles.
You are willing to discuss a treaty, then?
Yes, in Tekubenga. If you come with no more than 6 of your men.
He gestured, let the curtain fall, and the litter was turned around. The riders began to move back up the valley. Now, Subadar Bisht isn't happy about this, is he?
But he knows these people.
You know, Subadar Bisht, he knows exactly what's going on, and he knew what was going on from the very start. He even says things like, you know what, we Gurkhas, we're happy to die, but we don't want to die a dirty death at the hands of these weirdos.
You know what, it's also pretty cool that what you have here is a man who is well aware of his relationship to the English. As much as the Gurkhas sought this recognition and earned it, he also knows that he's on the downswing, under the British, right? He's Indian after all. And meanwhile, he's like, and those motherfuckers up there in the mountains, yeah, they're kind of subhuman. We Indians fear them and look down on them.
Yeah, he's not happy with them at all. There's even a point where Bastable thinks to himself, if I thought a Gurkha could feel fear, Bisht seems to be almost fearful. But as a Gurkha, there's no way he could feel fear. But Bisht ain't happy about it, but Bastable agrees to it because, of course, this is his mission, to parley with these people. So he proceeds with his Punjabi cavalry commander, Rizaldar Johan Sab, and 5 of his Sawars, and agrees to Bisht's plan. And Bisht suggests the plan, and Bastable agrees that if they don't return within a day, the Gurkhas will advance, and the remaining lancers will advance on Tekubenga. Well, of course, it turns out Subadar Bisht was absolutely spot on because Sharon Kang is an absolute rotter. The following pages are fantastic. The description of Tekubenga is terrific. The building menace of the Cumbalari priests and Sharon Kang. It's redolent of the old Victorian tales of the evils of the continent. That's kind of the point, isn't it?
And in fact, if I may very quickly share just one passage, I know eventually we have to, we can't go on for 3 hours. But when he says, I was at a loss to imagine how such a city, rearing as it did out of the crags of the Himalayas, had been built. Its crazy spires and domes defied the very laws of gravity. Its crooked walls followed the line of the mountain slopes, and many of the buildings looked as if they had been plucked up and perched delicately on slivers of rock which could scarcely support the weight of a man. Many of the roofs and walls were decorated with complicated carvings of infinitely delicate workmanship, set with jewels and precious metals, rare woods, jade and ivory. Finials curled in on themselves and curled again. Monstrous stone beasts glared down from a score of places on the walls. The whole city glittered in the cold light, and it did indeed seem older than any architecture I had seen or read about. Yet for all its richness and its age, Tekubenga struck me as being a rather seedy sort of place, as if it had known better days. Perhaps the Cumbalaris had not built it. Perhaps the race which had built it had mysteriously disappeared, as had happened elsewhere, and the Cumbalaris had merely occupied it. And of course, the next line is, oof, the stench.
That's right.
The horror.
Yeah. They even make jokes about whether they're strangers to water as well.
That's right.
his Punjabi lancers.
This is
Yeah,
distinctly an unhealthy place.
yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? And it's very, very sword and sorcery that
Well,
as
and
well.
Janab Shah, he even says that he wouldn't like to die there because not because of dying, but I fear what would happen to my soul. And he's onto something too, of course, or else we wouldn't have a book.
Absolutely. And it is very, very sword and sorcery. You know, you had it in Howard, you had it in the Conan tales with the ancient people of Hyperborea in the north.
But what makes it more creepy to me is that this is effectively based on a place that exists.
Yeah.
And not just in the author's mind, but like you can go to this part of the world and see really old shit up there.
Yeah.
You know?
And once again, it's a big part of that kind of old Victorian adventure fiction as well, isn't it?
And it's what I like
especially
about
Kipling, things like She, you know.
But it's a funny thing because and this is for me, it's always been the big thing that I admire about any kind of writer who tackles horror in any kind of way, is horror has to exist in a sense in a bubble where you're isolated from the rest of the world, unless it's going to be apocalyptic fiction. That there has to be a point where you can credibly, as a reader, imagine stepping away from, say, a Tesco into a nightmare and make it, and without the reader saying, fuck that's not working. And this is the way, right? This is, and it's what's happening to Bastable. I mean, as he departs from his reality, he's going through spooky places that are cliche, but but Moorcock in turn is getting us to buy it and actually feel creeped out because we know this could be a real place.
It's great stuff.
Good.
It's great stuff. And I always love that stuff in the early 20th century weird tales where, I mean, the Clark Ashton Smith stuff was never, kind of related to the real world, but it always had that element of vastly more ancient things being occupied by more primitive peoples who lacked the understanding or cultural awareness of where they lived, and it became seedy,
That's right.
and it degraded, and that they didn't have the cultural awareness or capability to live up to the standards of the people who came before.
Well, and even Tolkien does it in The Lord of the Rings when he talks about the Third Age. It's sort of Arcadian, it's sort of Sylvan. In some ways it's dangerous, but in many ways it's quiet. Finally, after all that other shit that went down in the first two ages. But so the hobbits are living there, but they don't quite seem to realize what they're living on top of, right? That's why you have the Barrow-wights and you have the trolls and all this kind of thing. And I find the Fellowship of the Ring in the beginning of that book, when they discuss strange things being seen at the edges of the Shire, to actually be some of the most effective parts of that series, because Tolkien was tapping into that same thing, ghostly haunts among us.
Yeah,
that's really cool to me. And Moorcock's doing it, of course, in his own way. Here.
I mean, the hobbits don't have to go far before they're in trouble from Old Man Willow and the Barrow-wights, aren't they? Because if you go beyond the forest that it's like, well, there's scary shit out there. So
but to me, it's just great because at the same time, I want to go there and see all that stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, long story short, they get drugged, and they have a short sequence of combat, and Bastable and his lancers escape into catacombs, but the effects of the drug render him delirious, and he loses his comrades and eventually consciousness. At that point, I'm thinking, I want to know what happened to Bisht and the Gurkhas and the rest of the lancers, but I guess when we find out what happened to Teku Benga later on, it did for all of those poor lads as well, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I guess they all died in the earthquake, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I like the fact that Moorcock doesn't say. I like the fact that he actually cuts these characters loose, even though I'm invested in them in only a few pages.
Yeah.
But the fact that he leaves it a mystery, or rather he implies rather than says, it's like Picnic at Hanging Rock, right? What happened to the girls?
Yeah. It's barely even got going yet, and there's so much rich detail, and
it's hard,
and people that you want to know more about. Even the framing device at the beginning, or the secondary framing device of Moorcock Senior on Roe Island, I could probably read a book about Moorcock on Roe Island.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I've been thinking in the run up to us talking on this conversation about how do I even express the kind of melancholy and adventure.
Yeah,
quiet places far away. What? He captures that atmosphere in a way that talks to me in a way that I almost don't know how to verbalize, but I know what it feels like.
When I'm just saying then that I want to read a whole book of that, I'm just reminded of my cousin Emily sent me a book by R.C. Sheriff, the guy who wrote Journey's End. And it's a novel called The Fortnight in September. And it's a 250-page novel about a family going on holiday to Bognor Regis. And it is absolutely riveting. It is brilliant. In the opening chapter, there's a scene where they take the budgie to be looked after by a widow who lives a couple of doors down. And in the space of a couple of paragraphs, she becomes the most tragic, lonely character that I've ever come across in a book, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. And she's mentioned once, and then there's a scene where one of the children take the budgie to the house, and she wants to talk to them and keep them talking. The child doesn't understand why, but the reader understands why, because she is so lonely. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. And the rest of the book is just packed with this stuff about this family going on holiday to Bognor Regis. And it's one of the most riveting 250-page books I've ever read. It's absolutely terrific.
And that's something I really respect in certain authors, when they can take really quotidian daily stuff and not just make it entertaining, but crucial somehow. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. I mean, when she sent me it, she said, "You'll wonder why I'm sending you this, because it's about a family in the 1950s going on holiday to Bognor Regis." But when I was reading it, I was just thinking, Andy, you'll love this. And she was absolutely spot on. I absolutely adore that book. It's terrific. Absolutely terrific. Funny enough, the opening chapters in the Teku Benga business, there are some light similarities to the Frank Capra film, The Lost Horizon, as well.
I was reading that book for the first time while I was taking my notes. I was in Berlin to see family, and I was taking notes by day on the Warlord of the Air, and at night before bed, my bedtime reading was Lost Horizon, which I never.
Well, what a bloody coincidence! Yeah. Synchronicity.
Well, and I kept
synchronicity.
I kept saying, okay, during this podcast, I have to say to Andy, Lost Horizon is the other side of the mountain of this of Teku Benga.
It's like Teku Benga before it's taken over by the sweaty weirdos.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Now, by the way, I never saw the movie Lost Horizon, but I'm told that is brilliant.
Well, I've never read the book, but I've seen the movie only because, and the only reason I'm even aware of this is because about 5 years ago, a listener pointed it out to me on Twitter. And he said, "Have you seen the film The Lost Horizon?" And I'd never seen it. And of course, on Blu-ray now, there's a reconstructed version of it because it went through all sorts of problems.
Well, the studio meddled with it.
Yeah. Studio meddled with it because of, the thought it had anti-war peacenik sentiments and all this business.
Yeah, it was 1937.
Yeah. So, but it's restored now, and I can't remember who it was because Twitter seems like a distant memory now. I've been off there so long, but
yeah, I'm not using it.
I can't remember who it was that pointed me at the Lost Horizon. But if you're listening, drop me a line and remind me who it was. I've got a feeling it might have been Anthony Piconti, but it may not have been. But anyway,
I'd be curious.
So, yeah.
Oh, and now Ronald Colman. Quick digression. Did Ronald Colman, was he good at the part?
Not having read the book, I can't really comment on whether
because he's the one from the 39 Steps. Is that him?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. One of the 30 billion versions of the 39 Steps.
Yes.
Yeah, there's so many different versions. At one point, me and Phil, over the course of a couple of weeks, we watched about 5 different versions. The one with Kenneth More, the one from the 70s with Robert Powell. There was a TV version of it.
Yeah, for me, it's Hitchcock is the only one.
We go on to chapter 3, The Shadow from the Sky. So he's unconscious. This is a chapter that I remember the most from reading it as a teenager because it was my first real exposure to the kind of vivid, violent imagery and craziness that you get in Moorcock books. And it also has that great reveal at the close of the chapter, which in the Ace Pocketbooks edition has got a very nice James Cawthorne edition. Because I forgot to mention, the Ace edition has James Cawthorne black and white illustrations.
Oh, yes.
Well, which is nice. Let's have a look. Let's read a bit. Do you want to read it?
Sure. The images in my head grew more horrific. Corpses filled my skull. Brutally maimed corpses. Dying children stretched out their hands to me for help. Bestial soldiers in colorless uniforms raped women. And everywhere there was fire, black smoke, collapsing buildings. I had to escape those images, and I made a great effort to move my arm. So, he's coming directly. This is the kind of war reporting that he interprets from television broadcasts, of course, from Vietnam, right? This would be the time when he would have been writing this. And it's the Tet Offensive, it's My Lai Massacre, right?
Of course,
It's those times when television first, in a sense, I believe, unwittingly question the narrative of the governments by simply rolling the reels that their correspondents were shooting, usually probably drunk and bombed out of their minds because it was traumatic as hell. But you saw things like I say, Milai in particular, but Moorcock does this repeatedly in the Cornelius books at times.
Very much so.
And elsewhere as well, of course, my life in I don't remember what the Third World War.
My experiences in the Third World War, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is Bastable, to tie it to the narrative, of course. He is run from room to room through Tekubenga to try to escape and find his people. And meanwhile, he keeps thinking he's been in this room before, but he hasn't. And he's essentially gone down a wormhole. And Tekubenga, of course, turns out in the Moorcock lore to be a hole in between universes, right? And so Bastable, without knowing it, because he wouldn't be able to have the vocabulary to say it or the knowledge, has ended up in a different place in the same place in a different time, in a different the same place in a different place. And so, of course, he has that moment where he passes through, shall we say, the real reality, which is almost between two subway cars that are moving in New York. He's for a moment in the noise and the chaos of the spheres turning, and he sees all of his possible histories. That's what's happening. The way I interpret it, anyway. But of course, you can summarize it all by it's horrible.
Yeah. And at first, it seems like a narrow escape because he finds himself in a world very shortly, which we'll get into. But he has all these vivid images and these visions of absolute abject horror, and then finds himself in what seems to be a utopia.
But of course, the best thing he can say, and I suppose that for any of us could, well, I'm alive.
Yeah. So at this point, he realizes that he's in the old decaying ruins of the city, and the only people he can find are old skeletons. But then we get this wonderful reveal, and it's the cover to one of the I think it's a Patrick Woodruff cover of one of the editions as well, of the man in tattered rags, because he comments that his uniform seems to have decayed, and at first he puts it down to perhaps some kind of gas in the catacombs, but is soon disabused of that notion. And it says, I was crouching in the ruins of one of the temples, trying to drag out another skeleton when I heard the sound. At first I thought it was a noise made by the bones scraping on the rock, but it was too soft. Then I wondered if I were not, after all, alone in the ruins. Could I be hearing the purr of a tiger? No, though that was more like the sound. I stopped tugging at the skeleton and cocked my head, trying to listen harder. A drum, perhaps? A drumbeat echoing through the mountains? It could be 50 miles away, however. I crawled back through the gap, and as I did so, a shadow began to spread across the rubble before me. A huge black shadow which might have been that of an enormous bird, save that it was long, regular in shape, and curved. Again I doubted my own sanity, and in some trepidation I forced myself to look upwards. I gasped in astonishment. This was no bird, but a gigantic cigar-shaped balloon, and yet it was like no balloon I had ever seen, for its envelope seemed rigid, constructed of some silvery metal. And attached to this envelope, not swinging from it by ropes, was a gondola almost the length of the balloon itself. What astonished me even more was the slogan, inscribed in huge lettering on the hull, Royal Indian Air Service. From its stern projected 4 triangular wings, which resembled nothing so much as the flukes of a whale, and painted on each of these in shining red, white, and blue was a large Union Jack. For a moment I could only stare at the flying monster in incredulous wonderment, and then I began to leap about the ruins, waving and yelling for all I was worth. Ooh.
Now I want to step back just one little moment, and I took notes on this, but of course I can't read them now. But right before all of this happened, right when Sharan Kang effectively, as far as Bastable feels, has given them the sleeping draft, right? The thing that he says that is a key to the rest of the book. And I wish I could find exactly where he said it. But when Bastable knows he thinks he's been drugged, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. You're not going to mesmerize me. I'm an English officer, and I'm one of your ignorant followers. Sharan Kang, for a moment, is not evil to me. He keeps telling Bastable, rest. I'll explain everything in the morning. Right?
Yes.
Sharan Kang has been where Bastable is going. Sharan Kang, in fact, is probably so strung out from life because he's been through what Bastable is about to go through. And in fact, Sharan Kang warns them, right? He says, you'll be fools to leave this room. Even we do not know every part of the maze, which is the temple of the future Buddha. Some say that sections of it do not even exist in our own time. Sharon Kang, in my view, he did not intend to do them down or to kill them all. The earthquake ended up doing that by accident. Sharon
Yeah.
Kang was trying to introduce them,
Mm.
for better or for worse, to the time streams. Whether it was because he thought they could do some good or whether he thought misery loves company, he wanted them alive. So that's just something I only thought about when I read it the most recent time. But I just had to.
No, that's a good point, and that's something I completely missed.
But I had to read this book 10 times to figure it out.
Yeah. It's only because he's coded as a sweaty, treacherous twat that you kind of miss that.
And he is
Yeah.
that. It's not that he's not a shady, treacherous twat.
Yeah.
But he's trying to tell Bastable something. That's why he lures them up there the way he does, right? Because he's got something.
Yeah.
He's got a present he wants to share. And Bastable, like it or not, has received it.
You know what? That just layers on the mystery, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful interpretation, which makes me want to read that whole passage again. Oh, yeah. Well, this is what is so great about reading.
There you go.
Isn't it? Oh, it's a great thing about reading and about reading interesting authors.
Yes.
You know? Oh, yeah.
Well, I took you off the track. We have to go back to the.
If only he'd just got his dudes to have a bath, we might not have missed that point.
Right? That's the thing. Body odor, I'm afraid that it's, as they said in the old commercial in America, you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Yeah, very true. Well, to cut a long story short, the airship spots him. It's in chapter 4, which is subtitled An Amateur Archaeologist. The airship spots him, and after getting a soak-in from the airship's ballast, he's soon on board thanks to a Cockney fella and another bloke called Bert. I'd like to think that Bert is a northerner. But the baffled Bastable then meets a Major Powell, who's a short fella with a solar toupee. Now, I had to look this up because I thought a solar toupee was some kind of extravagant wig. But a solar toupee is a pith helmet.
That's right. And I only know that because I a long time ago in another life I studied Turkish and in fact that what they call a hat, at least when I was studying it, they called it topi, T-O-P-I.
Right. Okay. So it's not a toupee; it's a topi.
But right. I think that's where we get toupee.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right, the other direction.
Well, you know what? Reading this book was an education because there's something else I had to look up later on as well.
Using colonialist tropes in the opposite direction.
I like it. So Major Powell, this short fella, Bastable is absolutely baffled and is sent to his sick bay that looks to him like a first-class train carriage. It's so plush. It's got strange apparatus that he can't fathom. But he gets some PJs, so he's clean, he's in PJs, and is consulted by a young, soft-spoken Scottish doctor. And here he finds he's either lost his mind or something damn peculiar has occurred, because he learns that Teku Benga was destroyed in an earthquake in 1902. And he learns this from Major Powell, an amateur archaeologist who's fairly knowledgeable about the lost civilization of Kumbalari. There hasn't been an earthquake in Teku Benga in living memory. It was the sharp, precise voice of Major Powell who had come in as we talked. He looked at me with a certain wary curiosity, and I very much doubt that anyone could live there for 2 years. There's nothing to eat, for one thing. On the other hand, there's no other explanation as to how you got there, unless a private expedition I haven't heard about flew there 2 years ago. It was my turn to smile. Hardly likely, sir. No ship of this kind existed 2 years ago. In fact, it's remarkable how... I think you'd better check him up here, Jim, said Major Powell, tapping his head with his stick. This poor chap's lost all sense of time, or something. What was the date when you left for Teku Benga, Captain Bastable? June the 25th, sir. And what year? Why, 1902, sir. The doctor and the Major stared at each other in some concern. That's when the earthquake happened, all right, Major Powell said quietly. 1902. Almost everybody killed. And there were some English soldiers there. Oh, by God, this is ridiculous. He returned his attention to me. You were in a serious condition, young man. I wouldn't call it amnesia, but some sort of false memory. Mind playing tricks on you, eh? Perhaps you've read a lot of history, eh? Like me. Perhaps you're an amateur archaeologist, too. Well, I expect we can soon cure you and learn what really happened. What's so odd about my story, Major? Well, for one thing, old chap, you're a bit too well preserved to have got up to Teku Benga in 1902. That was over 70 years ago. This is July the 15th. The year, I'm afraid, is 1973. AD, of course. Does that ring a bell? I shook my head. Sorry, Major. I'll agree with you on one thing. I'm obviously completely insane. Let's hope it's not permanent, smiled the doctor. Probably been reading a bit too much H.G. Wells, eh?
H.G. Wells.
Ah!
My God.
Name drop.
Lighthouse in the Night.
Name drop.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff. And of course, in the earlier passage, when he woke up, remember he says not only the clothing, right, that he was wearing, but he said that not just that there were cracks in the stone, but that there were weeds in the cracks. Been there a long time. Side note, I started looking up the different ship names that he was using because I wanted to see if they had any historical basis.
Yes.
And at one point they refer to this ship, right? I think they're on the Pericles. In the Shakespeare play of Pericles, there is a shipwreck in that play, just by the by. And apparently, at the time, in the 19th century, there was a 3-masted sailing ship on the Aberdeen line that carried wool. It was a 1,000, no, I'm not even sure I have the numbers right, but it was an iron-hulled 3-masted sailing ship, Aberdeen line, 1877. It sailed between Australia, Fiji. Eventually, it was scrapped in Kiel in Germany in 1923. I'm just saying, I wonder if he was doing some research because a lot of the ships I looked up were real.
When he's reading, because he was a reader and collector of all these magazines like Pall Mall and all these magazines that had things like the Battle of Dorking serialised in them, pre-turn of the century and post. All of these magazines that he was a huge collector of, they all had all these articles, and they weren't just, they didn't just contain stories of fiction. They contained all sorts of articles about seafaring, about trade, about world geopolitics. So, yeah, I mean, his head must have been absolutely bursting with this stuff.
Yeah, and it's a great way to rip when you need to fill in some stuff, right?
Oh.
Giving that bit of verisimilitude also anchors the book down a bit more, right? So that it's not just out there in the middle of nowhere. It's one more way to give that cool, entrancing feeling of it could be real, couldn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the more you anchor things in some element of reality, the better you are.
Absolutely.
When it came to my ship titles, I just called them things like Stress on My Mince and Golf Cunt. I could probably learn a thing or two from Moorcock, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah. Driftwood Unicorn, things like that. Anyway.
Yeah.
After a great kip.
I'm not quick enough to come up with a good ship name, but I'll think about it.
I've got a huge list of them for if I ever get round to writing part 3. But
fucking bathtub, the HMS fucking bathtub. Yeah, there you go.
Good enough.
Yeah.
Good enough.
It'll do.
So he is on the patrol ship Pericles, and they'll land at a vast airship park where he's transferred to a hospital, but not before he's wowed by the sights he sees. And so he's at, I think, where is he? He's at Kathmandu, isn't he?
Yes.
He's at the airfield at Kathmandu.
And apparently a much less earthquake-prone Kathmandu.
As we emerged into clear, warm air, and the bed bumped a trifle as it was wheeled over flattened grass to what was plainly a hospital van, for it had large red crosses painted on its white sides. The van was motorised by the look of it. There were no horses in evidence. Glancing around me, I received my second shock of pure astonishment at the sight which now met my gaze. Dotted about a vast field were a number of towers, smaller than, but strongly resembling the Eiffel Tower in Paris. About half of these towers were in use. Great pyramids of steel girders to which were moored the best part of a dozen airships, most of which were considerably larger than the giant in which I had been brought. It was obvious that not all the flying monsters were military vessels. Some were commercial, having the names of their lines painted on their sides and decorated rather more elaborately than, for instance, the Pericles. You can be the doctor here, seeing you do such a good Scottish accent. Yes, so I shall read on, and then you can read the doctor's dialogue in your really beautiful Scottish brogue.
I'm going to really piss off all your Caledonians.
Let's do it. Well, no, what you should be a little bit more confident, because do you remember James Doohan, who played Scotty in Star Trek?
But of course.
Well, yeah, naturally. So when they first suggested to him that he play a Scottish character, he said, well, which Scottish would you like?
Okay.
I'll do it in my Aberdeen Scottish.
I'm going to do the...
breathe in a bit of Jimmy Doohan.
I'll do the Northeast American Jimmy Doohan.
Okay.
I'm going to give her all she's got.
Yeah. So, do Canadian Scottish, like Jimmy Doohan.
Yeah, right.
The doctor came up alongside as my bed bumped across the grass.
How are you feeling?
Better, thanks. Where are we?
Don't you recognise it? It's Kathmandu. Our headquarters are here.
Kathmandu. The last time I'd seen the city, it had been very distinctly an eastern capital with architecture in the age-old style of these parts. But now in the distance, beyond the great mooring towers, I could see tall white buildings rising up, story upon story, so that it seemed they almost touched the clouds. Certainly there were Nepalese buildings too, but they were completely dwarfed by the soaring white piles. I noticed something else before I was lifted into the motor van. a long ribbon of steel raised on a series of grey pillars which stretched away from the city and disappeared over the horizon. And what's that? I asked the doctor. He looked puzzled.
What? The monorail. It's a monorail, of course.
You mean a train runs along that single track?
Exactly.
He paused as he got into the van with me and the doors closed with a soft hiss of air.
You know, Bastable, your surprise is damn convincing. I wish I knew what was wrong with you.
I decided to propose my lie. Could it be amnesia, Doctor? There was a soft bump as the van began to move, but I did not hear the familiar clatter of an internal combustion engine. What's powering this thing?
What did you expect? It's steam, of course. This is an ordinary Stanley flash-fired steamer van.
Not a petrol engine.
Primitive things. Steam motor is infinitely more efficient. You must know all this, Bastable. I'm not saying you're deliberately trying to deceive me, but...
I think you'd better assume that I've forgotten everything but my name, Doctor. All the rest is probably a delusion I went through. Something brought on by exposure and despair at ever being rescued. You'll probably find I'm the survivor of a mountain climbing expedition which disappeared some years ago.
Exposure and despair, you're a fucking cunt. Wait, that's Irish.
Now, we do have some Scottish listeners, so we'll let them judge.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we'll let them judge. But anyway, so Moorcock basically invents steampunk.
So I have listened to you and your other guests talk about this so many times. Is this steampunk?
Well, some steampunk nerds out there will disagree, and I don't claim to be a steampunk guy. But this does predate all the KW Jetta and the Tim Power stuff and everything else by several years or more, probably 10 years plus, and the difference engine by 19 years. And Jetta wouldn't coin the term until the late 80s. And even then, I think it was tongue-in-cheek, but it had wings, didn't it?
I think yes, and I think probably the in my experience anyway, the sort of the ne plus ultra of steampunk was when I watched the Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman Sherlock Holmes. I seem to remember that was sort of steampunky. Or maybe I'm wrong. There was a film. It was a film, not the TV show. Anyway.
Yes, the Robert Downey Jr., Jude Law.
Yes, sorry.
Have elements of steampunk, but I think the elements of steampunk. The problem with steampunk for me, and we're going to upset the steampunkers now, is that I've seen Warlord of the Air retroactively labelled steampunk and proto-steampunk. It kicks a lot of it off, that's for sure, but I don't think Brian Talbot's work on Nemesis the Warlock gets enough credit in that sphere either. But it kicks it off, but none of the other trappings are there. Because you've got the basic elements of like the alternate history technology element. We find out that some of these steam power is what's basically running everything, but we also find that the big airships are run by computers. Yes. And he calls them computers. He doesn't call them Babbage engines. He doesn't call them logic calculators or anything like that. He just uses the word computers and he doesn't go into any detail.
I think what's steampunk here is not the technology that's on display in the book. I think that it's the way Bastable talks about it, or the way that he narrates it to us, because he, to some extent, can't talk about things that he's had no experience with. So he has to use terms from his own time, and I think that's what lends that kind of aroma of steampunk to the novel.
Yeah, we've got the aroma, but we've got the sense of wonder as well. And I think this is probably why some steampunky people have called it proto-steampunk, because it doesn't tick all of their boxes. Unusually for Moorcock, we haven't had a single paragraph describing what someone's wearing in intense detail.
No, the only thing he's talked about are the clothes that got old while Bastable didn't.
Yeah, and he shortly talks about a nurse's uniform being only 12 inches from her ankles, which he finds incredibly exhilarating.
I would just note that never fails to thrill. Same way as Bastable.
Yeah, I love that bit. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah,
because he gets so bewildered and quietly exciting when a nurse tends to him and her skirt is so short it shows off her calves and the prettiest set of ankles. And he can't help but blush when she takes his pulse. It's absolutely brilliant.
Too bad there was no internet. He could have just taken care of all his possible needs satisfied 1,000 times over. It's a genre of its own.
This is very true. All kinks are catered for. Okay. But, don't come for me, steampunks, but all that cogs on pith helmets, big goggles, waistcoats, all that bollocks, I don't like it. I appreciate that you dig it. Some of my best friends are steampunks, etc. It's just not my bag. It's not my bag.
You punk racist, you.
Yeah, well, I'm too fat for it all anyway.
Some of my best friends.
Yeah, I'm too fat for steampunk gear, so that's my excuse. But it's all good stuff. Major Powell visits Bastable will get a big history lesson, and as well as marvelling over a cigarette lighter, which he finds absolutely bafflingly brilliant, a gas jet cigarette lighter, which to Moorcock at the time was probably like, oh, this is pretty cool, a gas jet cigarette lighter.
Yeah.
Well, by the 90s, we actually had gas jet cigarette lighters, which is kind of cool. Yeah. So he's ahead of his time. But he hears from Powell that there have been no wars since the Boer War of 1910, in which Kipling, that great defeatist about Pax Britannica, who was discredited, lost his life in the Boer War. And the British came to terms with the Boers after making multiple concessions. And the other part of the world building here is the colonial powers include Imperial Russia. So Russia, the Empire of Russia never fell. Japan, France, Italy, Germany, the Greater American Commonwealth, and of course, Great Britain. And Powell is very proud to say that the Pax Britannica has held for all of the 20th century up to 1973. And early pessimists like Kipling and Lloyd George, who thought that the empire would inevitably collapse, were all proven wrong. Although Powell does point out that he's not keen on the methods that the Japanese and Russians use with their colonial holdings in China, but stability is stability at the end of the day.
Is he Powell in your book?
Powell, yeah. What's he in yours?
Howell.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe he's...
Yeah, off top of my head, I can't think.
You have him on. That's question number 1, and you have to tell him that's a very important question, and it's headline news for us. We got to know.
Yeah, Howell versus Powell. Now, what could he have been driving at, changing it to Powell?
Fuck if I know.
Answers on a postcard, people.
Yeah.
Answers on a postcard.
Yeah.
But Bastable also learns of remote control window blinds, the existence of plastic, modern ship construction methods like boron carbon fibre hulls. Oh, he's well impressed with all of it. This is I gave up trying to understand Major Powell. I was never much of a scientist at the best of times. I accepted the mystery of this plastic as I accepted, while a schoolboy, the mysteries of electrical lighting. Still, it was a comfort to me in the face of all these new wonders that some things had not changed a great deal. Indeed, they had improved. The carping critics of imperialism in my own day would have been silent pretty sharply if they'd heard what I'd just heard, and seen the evidence of prosperity and stability which I could now see from my window. I warmed with pride at that moment and thanked Providence for this vision of utopia. Over the past 70 years, the white man had shouldered his burden jolly well, it seemed to me. Major Powell stood up and went to the window, echoing my own thoughts as he stared out, his hands clasped over his swagger stick behind his back. How those Victorians would have loved to see all this, he murmured. All their ideals and dreams realised so fully, but there's still work for us to do. He turned and looked hard at me, his face half in shadow. And a proper study of the lessons of the past, Bastable, helps us with that work. I'm sure you're right, he nodded. I am. He came to attention and saluted me with his swagger stick. Well, old chap, I must be off. Duty calls.
I love it. I love it when somebody can say, I know I am.
I know I am.
That never happens to me.
The confidence.
Yes.
The confidence of empire. Yeah. He began to walk towards the door. Then something happened. A dull thump which seemed to shake the whole building. In the distance I heard sirens sounding, bells ringing. Major Powell's face was suddenly grim and white, and his dark eyes blazed with anger. What is it, Major? Bomb. Here? Anarchists. Madmen. European troublemakers, almost certainly. Not the Indians at all. Germans. Russians. Jews. They've all got a vested interest in the disruption of order. He ran from the room. Duty was indeed calling him now. The sudden change from tranquility to violence had taken my breath away. I lay back in the bed trying to see what was happening outside. I saw an army motor race across the air park. I heard the sound of another far-off explosion. Who on earth could be insane enough to plot the destruction of such a utopia as this?
I mean, I never would.
Well,
not me.
Well, we'll find out, won't we? We'll find out, and we'll find out where Bastable fits in all of this. But in Chapter 6, he's poked and prodded in a hospital at the impressively futuristic, for him, Calcutta, and he finds that Army intelligence are baffled by the fact that he's going by the name of Captain Bastable, who was recorded as lost in the earthquake at Teku-Benga in 1902. So he's something of a mystery. But they ship him off back to England in the vast, state-of-the-art, computer-controlled airship, the Light of Dresden.
It's a great name for a ship. Great name.
It's fantastic. A British-German co-design. and once again is super impressed. 6,000 miles in 72 hours without ever landing aboard an airship, with hotel-quality quarters and dining to rival the Ritz. It's a wonderful suggestion, that the idea that this ship is named the Light of Dresden, and Britain and Germany collaborated on its design and the running of it. So we know in this world, instantly it calls to mind the fact that Dresden will still be as beautiful in this world as it was in the 1930s.
And he used two real companies as the were they the makers? Yeah, it was Krupp, right? The 500-year-old weapons maker. I mean, in real life, and Vickers. Is Vickers a defense firm as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I think Vickers might have been bought up by British Aerospace, BAE Systems now.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. But Vickers, right up until I think the 1980s, maybe even the 90s, was still designing armoured vehicles for export.
Yes.
It's been around a long time. So it's not just sucking Bastable in with the wonders of this world, but as a reader, especially a reader in 1971, someone like Pops, who's reading this in 1971, is reading this and is getting sucked in there with this wonderful idea that Britain and Germany, there's not been a war since 1910, and Britain and Germany are collaborators on technology and wonderful technical marvels, and the reminder that the Light of Dresden is that Dresden and places like Coventry will still be these wonderful places.
Well, and the crazy part about this name, the Light of Dresden, is that it sounds like, I mean, light, it implies lightness as well as beautiful light. And of course, that part of Germany where, with crystals and all that kind of stuff that they made. And of course, the beauty that Dresden was before the firebombing. But the funny thing is, of course, you can read light like firebombing. I mean, I feel that it's not an accident that he chose that name.
It's so enticing and inviting the reader to interpret this in different ways, but also just like get sucked into the idea of this European utopia.
Well, and it's also the same way that if you look at a prism or you look at a kaleidoscope, I mean, he's showing you possibilities. And the funny part is he's doing it in almost every sentence. Now, I don't always think he's successful. They're like, for example, using Mick Jagger as the lieutenant. To me, that's too broad. It's
a throwaway thing, isn't it? It's
a
throwaway thing.
I mean, it's cute to imagine him dressed that way, but I mean, come on, that to me was too much. But he also, Moorcock's like a comedian. He's like Buster Keaton in some ways. Like he's going to throw 8,000 jokes at you, and some of them won't work.
Yes, absolutely.
But who cares?
He's an ideas machine, isn't he?
And also, the other nice thing about that whole exposition here is that he does not lay it on too thick. There's exposition, there's explanation. He's catching us up, but it never feels like pages upon pages of world building. At least it doesn't to me. I don't know about you, but
no, it's too brisk, isn't he?
Yeah,
it's too brisk. One of the great joys of Moorcock is even when he hits a bum note, it's gone.
Yes,
absolutely. It's gone. It's like a live performance of your favorite band.
Yes,
a bum note, and seconds later they're back on track, or they're playing something wonderful, or you've got a wonderful drum fill that just pleases you. Oh, it's great. It's great stuff. And he's talked in the past about approaching some of his writing like music. And it's definitely there. The rhythm, and the fills and everything else. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so he travels in the company of an agreeable Lieutenant Michael Jagger. I've got to say, I'm reading this as a kid, and Mick Jagger is. I'm reading it now, and all I can picture is Mick Jagger in his ridiculous oversized helmet in Free Jack. It ruins it a little bit, frankly.
I was thinking more of Mick Jagger I mean, he would have been younger. This would have been performance era Jagger.
Yeah.
Right. But Jagger was in a movie in the past 10 or 15 years. I forget the name of it, but his hair was all slicked back. He's playing the older fellow, and he's impeccably dressed. And of course, because he's in great shape, he can wear those slim suits. But I was preferring to think of Jagger. I was making an ideal Mick Jagger.
Really, what you're envisioning here with him in his uniform is Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, Mick Jagger.
Yes, that would be about right.
Yeah. But it's, it all sounds pretty groovy traveling on this airship for 72 hours, because it sounds pretty fucking fantastic, And London is even more impressed with London because it's an electrified city of marvels. There's electrical illuminations of all imaginable colours, and combinations of colours blossomed from every slender tower and massive dome. Brightly lit ramps brought motor traffic around these towers on many levels, winding up and down as if supported on the very air itself. Even some of these paragraphs, 2000 AD artists who were illustrating Megacity 1 are just drawing these pictures.
Yes.
But in London, there were no ugly billboards, no illuminated advertisements, no tasteless slogans, and as we climbed into the steam brougham and began to move along one of the ramps, I realised that there were no seedy slums of the sort found in many parts of the London I had known in 1902. Poverty had been banished. Disease had been exiled. Misery must surely be unknown. I hope I have managed to convey some of the elation I experienced when first encountering the London of 1973. There is no question of its beauty, its cleanliness, its marvellously ordered civic amenities. There is no question that the people were well-fed, cheerful, expensively dressed, and, all in all, very much satisfied with their lot. During the next day or so, I was taken around London by a Dr. Peters, who hoped that some familiar sight might awaken my brain from its sleep. I went through with this charade because there was precious little else I could do. Eventually, I knew they would give up. I would then be free to choose a profession, perhaps rejoin the army, since I was used to army life. But until that time, I was a man without a purpose, and I might just as well do what others wanted me to do. Everywhere I went, I was amazed at the change which had taken place in that once dirty, fog-bound city. Fog was a thing of the past. The air was clean and sharp. Trees and shrubs and flowers grew wherever there was a space to plant them. Butterflies and birds flew about in great profusion.
You might want to read the next sentence.
Fountains played in pretty squares, and sometimes we would come across a brass band entertaining the public, or a conjurer, or a Punch and Judy show, or some... Oh, good Lord.
Yep.
Yes, some... We won't say the word, minstrels.
Indeed.
It's the worst word. The worst word, minstrels. Not all the old buildings had gone. As fresh and clean as if they had just been built, I saw Tower Bridge and the Tower of London itself, St. Paul's, the Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace, where a new King Edward VIII, now quite an old man, had his residence. The British people were, as always, accepting the best of the new and conserving the best of the old. I began to see my visit in 1973 as a wonderful holiday, a holiday which, if I were lucky, might go on forever.
It's amazing the way Moorcock writes the delusion into sentences like, the British people were, as always, accepting the best of the new and conserving the best of the old. It's such... He's taking the piss in a major, major way by just writing a little travelogue.
One of the worst tendencies of the British is to try to conserve what they see as the best of the old. And we're absolutely polluted by that at the moment. And it's depressing. And yeah, it's a perfect example, this, of Bastable being representative of the worst British instincts, despite the fact that we know that his arc is going to change this perspective.
Yes. So he's currently in the Village Green Preservation Society.
Yeah.
Right. And he's a racist, not with malintent. He's a racist because that's just, it's the conditioning, it's the nurturing, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, he's still at this point in the book, his degradation has not yet begun, right?
Yeah.
He's been tested greatly by Sharon Kang, but he's resilient. He bounces back. He seems genuinely a decent fellow, a decent chap, with not just the casual racism, which strikes us as even worse now than it might have even done 40 years ago or 50 years ago. But we know, of course, that he's headed for a great education that's going to do bad things to him in making him actually a better person and a worse person. But he's a deluded man, and he's just like everybody else. And I think that, and I don't know, because I'm not from Britain, but I don't know how somebody like your grandfather would have read that in 1971 or whenever the book came out.
You know what? The sad thing is that it probably would have just washed over him. You know, things like that. In many ways, Pops was in many ways quite an interesting, progressive fella.
But you can only be as progressive in a sense, you can only really be as progressive as times allow.
Exactly.
And even to be a radical, say in 1780, or like Mary Wollstonecraft, or
Yeah.
Lord Byron or somebody, or even D.H. Lawrence 100 years later, or however long it was, there's a limit to your radicalness, which is going to be proscribed by the fact that you simply that events in history haven't happened yet, and we look back at them and then say, well, we find them wanting.
When I was a kid, there were certain expressions which these days would make your toes curl.
Yep.
That were just common parlance.
I used my versions of those.
Yeah. Even with people that were progressive and liberal and left-leaning, because they were just part of everyday vocabulary. And, when you're our age, I'm a year older than you, when you're our age, you think back to certain things from when you were a youth and you think, holy shit, thank God we've come on a wee while from there.
Yeah.
But I think it's really telling that Moorcock has made multiple revisions to this text, and I'm reading the most recent revision. And in the 60s and into even the turn of the 70s, he was still describing black characters as Negroes.
Yes, but I think that I believe he was doing that with intent.
But my point here is that he's revised this multiple times, and it's important that he didn't revise this.
Well, and as we'll see with Egan/Reagan,
absolutely,
when that word comes up multiple other times, there's a reason why that he's deploying it.
That's right. He's deploying it as a blunt weapon. Whereas I think there's a very keen reason why Moorcock revised these texts and says, no, I won't change that because it's an essential part of Bastable's arc.
Yes, absolutely.
It's an essential part of Bastable's arc, so he doesn't change it, and that's where it is. Yeah, the whole Rough Rider Ronnie. Ooh, blimey. Blimey, we'll get to that. Although we perhaps won't get to that specific part in this episode, but let's see how we go. Bastable's a bit of a celebrity for a time. He's all the rage on the kinematograph and the Marconi phone, in fact. He even meets the Prime Minister. We're into book 2 now. More strange events, a revelation, and several disasters. And chapter 1 is called A Question of Employment.
Over the next 6 months, I must admit that I led a life of ease. I continued to feign amnesia, and naturally enough, nothing the doctors could do would bring back my quote-unquote memory. Sometimes it even seemed to me that the world of 1902 had been nothing more than an extremely detailed dream. At first this worried me, but eventually it no longer came to matter to me in which period of time I quote-unquote belonged. I was regarded as something of a phenomenon, and for a short time was a celebrity. Newspaper articles were written about my mysterious appearance in the Himalayan mountains, and the speculation, particularly in the farthing press, grew wilder and wilder. Some of those articles were so fanciful they even touched on the truth. I was interviewed for the kinematograph, whose colored pictures could now talk as well as move. For the Marconi phone, now a version of the telephone, which from central stations broadcast news reports, plays, and popular music to almost every home, where the receivers were amplified so that they no longer had to be lifted to the ear, but could be heard from another room if desired. I attended a reception at which the Liberal Prime Minister was present. The Liberals had been in office for over 30 years, and the Conservatives were very much a party in decline. And learned that socialist agitation in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had actually had a good effect on saner political parties, like the Liberals, had in fact given a certain amount of impetus to many of the social improvements I had witnessed. Only recently had the serpent of socialism, almost incredibly, begun to rear its head again in political life. Not that the creed had any support from the British people. As usual, a few fanatics and neurotic intellectuals used it as a means of rationalizing their own insane dreams.
Bloody socialists. Always wanting to ruin the party for the middle classes.
Again.
Yeah. There's another interesting part as well. It says, the population had risen considerably, but the working man was as well-to-do as many middle-class people of 1902, and only had to work a 30-hour week to keep himself in virtual luxury. There was no problem finding a well-appointed house to live in, or a job of work to do, for the excess population of the nation was more than willing to expand beyond the British Isles. Every year thousands left to go out to all corners of the empire, to Africa, to India, to the protectorates in China or the dominions of Australia, New Zealand and Canada. All over the world the British were settling and administering, and so civilising, even the most inaccessible areas thanks to the invention of the airship. Of course, when he's publishing this, it's like it's the advent of the British holidaygoers travelling abroad, going to Spain.
And buying property.
buying property, all the boomers buying houses for £3,000.
Yep.
You know, so there's the element of the aspiration to the middle class dream,
But
which
he's
is
so
just seeding.
He's telegraphing with his tongue so far in his cheek that it's really amazing. You know,
Yeah.
and all the while he's told you about why this bomb blast and why would anybody do such a thing. I mean, all we're doing is moving into where these people live and civilizing them and finding nice places for us to live while they work for us.
Not only that, Bert, from down the street, if he wants, can visit his family in Australia for next to nothing.
A rising tide lifts all airships.
It's wonderful. It's what a wonderful vision for the people who were reading this in 1971. I was thinking, for the very first time, I can go on a holiday to the Costa Brava, you know, rather than go to Bognor Regis, for example.
Benidorm, Bognor Regis.
Yeah,
Benidorm.
absolutely. Yeah. And there's this other excellent bit. It says, no steam locomotive cast palls of smoke over trees and plants, and advertisement hoardings had long since been abolished, as had all the uglier features of English life at the beginnings of the 20th century. Electrically driven bicycles were available to those of the most modest income, and it meant that town people could enjoy the pleasures of the countryside whenever they desired. Prices were low, wages were high, some skilled workmen getting as much as £5 per week, and if one had a few extra sovereigns to spare, then an air trip to France or Germany was often in order. By a little diligent saving, the man in the street could even afford passage by airship to visit relatives in the more distant lands of the empire. And as for the seamier side of life, well, there was hardly any at all, for the social and moral evils which had created them had been abolished. The suffragettes of my own day would have been happy to hear that women over 30 now had the vote. There was talk of extending the franchise to women of 21. The length of girls' frocks, incidentally, was if anything shorter in London than the first I'd seen in Kathmandu. After some months, I managed to work up courage to invite one or two pretty girls to the theatre, or to a conference. To a concert. Conference. Fuck me. That'd be boring, wouldn't it?
That's what we do these days. We invite
You wanna come?
lovely
Yeah,
people
come.
to the conference.
Yeah, well, I once took Phil to the Labour Party conference. We had a lovely time. So, usually, these were the daughters of the doctors or army officers with whom I spent my leisure time, and, by our standards, the girls were rather, quote-unquote, forward, accepting very much an equal position in society and as outspoken as any man. After my initial surprise, I found this most refreshing, as I found the plays I saw, which had many rather daring Shavian qualities, though politics, thankfully, was missing from them. Okay, we'll get another little seed there that Bastable's shocked by the forwardness and the openness and the directness of women wanting to exert some kind of control over the agenda. He finds it attractive. So again, seeding that Bastable actually isn't an arsehole.
He's delightfully surprised by forward women, and forward means they have thoughts of their own.
That's right.
They do things.
Yeah.
And I realize that it's a brave new world, but I'm not sure. This might have been too radical for Moorcock to write. I just don't know. I think he might have been pushing it a bit. Not.
I think it's wonderful. It's like when he's describing these forward women, he's not talking about them slipping their hand down his pants. He's talking about them having opinions.
Yes.
and Bastable finds this quite delightful once he's got used to it.
Yes.
They're
very cute when they have ideas.
Yeah. Aren't women glorious when they have thoughts of their own? And they wear skirts to the knee, so I can see their ankles. Now, I did have to look up Shavian.
You know what? I skipped by it.
I had to look it up because just like solar toupee or topi, I had to look up Shavian. But it's a reference to George Bernard Shaw's theory of democratic socialism. So there you go. Sharing the means of production, eradicating class division, other Fabian-esque approaches to gradual systemic social change, as opposed to revolutionary. So whilst in the background of this, we've got these little seeds like the bombing and like the other bits and pieces that there is like a revolutionary element in the world. He's enjoying hanging out with these lasses and going to see plays. These lasses are hip, society, socialist, intellectual types, which you think might be a bit tough for a geezer from 1903 to handle, but he digs it.
So he's all right with dabbling for entertainment purposes in economic socialism to an extent, as long as politics aren't involved, which of course you can't untie those. Yeah.
But isn't it the case though that a lot of people, they will really, really enjoy things that are blatantly political.
Yes.
Without realizing that they're political.
And so somebody like Shaw would, of course, be very pleased with himself because he say, I gave them the pill with some sugar around it.
Yeah.
But what Bastable is failing. I mean, what he's doing is that typical response in which he's rather patronizing, the same way he is with the women, right? Oh, it's so cute, the ideas they have, and some of them might actually be okay. And thank God there's no politics mixed into it.
But you know what?
The world's changing outside his door again.
That crack is there, and it can be prized open.
Yes.
And it will be. It will be prized open. At the moment, it's cute.
Yes.
But it's enough of a crack in his facade of what he understands to be English.
It really is the first moment that takes him on his ideological journey.
It's lovely stuff. I mean, it all sounds pretty sweet as well, you know?
Sure.
When I was hanging out in the 90s, all the lasses I was knocking about with were hip, socialist, intellectual types. And I've got to say, I found it particularly wonderful as well. So I'm totally on board with Bastable at this point. Obviously, is a product of his environment, is a product of his time, but all the signs are there that he's going to go in the right direction.
Yes.
You know?
Only it's going to be hard and painful.
Yeah. And this is why Bastable is probably my favourite Moorcock character.
Yeah.
You know, his 15 minutes of fame are over pretty quickly, though. He gets a job in the Special Air Police, and after a year aboard a modest airship, the Loch Ness, he gets reassigned to the pride of the fleet of this Scottish company, the Locomotive, a huge state-of-the-art computer-equipped airship captained by, well, in yours, it's Captain Harding.
And in yours?
It's Captain Quelch.
I was hoping it would be Captain Parting.
No, it's Captain Quelch. Because Quelch hasn't been invented by Moorcock in 1971. He's a character, I think, that probably comes around in... Was the second Ether trilogy the early 90s? I think it was. So it's a much later Moorcock character from the second Ether trilogy that started with Blood.
Yeah, so confession time, I never read... The only Moorcock I've read after Mother London was King of the City.
For me, this is quite an irritating change, right? Because Captain Quelch is doing it purely because he likes to do these things, you know, not because it makes sense for the story.
Right.
Because Captain Quelch he's in the Coming of the Terror Files, of course. He's part of the second Ether trilogy. He's amongst the Chaos Engineers.
Oh, that's right. I did read Terror Files, which I've already...
Yeah, so it's been retroactively inserted here just because Mike likes doing things like that, even though his character is completely different. Because this is a guy, he's a ship captain who Bastable really admires, has a really good relationship with. It makes no sense to rename him Captain Quelch, other than he's a captain.
Yes.
You know, which is a little bit irritating. So the second Ether and Terror...
looking for a home.
Yeah, so the second Ether and Terror Files version, Captain Horace Quelch, is a captain of a singularity ship that serves law, is usually human, but in some depictions his other form is a crystalline insectoid fella who worships law as the original insect and seeks to destroy chaos and have the multiverse become a different kind of crap, a static state of no change and rubbishness. And there are also suggestions.
The same thing I did before I joined Reuters. I was
yeah. There are also suggestions, because it's depicted at one point by having 6 fingers on each hand, is that Captain Quelch might be Quill of the Lost Gods.
Oh.
Which again, I don't know. Quill wasn't for Chaos or Law. He and Rin were beyond all that. It's probably just a bit of mischief from Moorcock and/or artist Walter Simonson when they did the Moorcock's Multiverse comic.
6 fingers, so he was basically a Hemingway cat.
Yeah. It's, you know what, for me, just please don't do things like this, Mike. You know, just leave him as Captain Harding. Captain Quelch. It's slightly irritating for me, this. There was a real Captain Quelch too, a historical Captain Quelch.
That I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. An English pirate who worked out of Marblehead, Massachusetts.
Okay, so so he would have been working for, it would have been after Queen Elizabeth, of course.
Yeah, so he raided Portuguese merchantmen in his ship, which was called the George, under the flag of St. George, and was hanged in Boston in 1704.
That reprobate.
Yeah, sounded like quite a character. So, you know, Quelch is such an unusual name.
Yeah.
That Moorcock must have got this Captain Quelch character name from this historical English pirate. But it's not the first time Moorcock used a historical mariner as inspiration for a character name, because Geronimus Cornelius was a rumbugger, also a heretic, one step ahead of the law, who planned a mutiny aboard the Dutch East India Company flagship, the Batavia, in the 17th century. You may have heard the tale of the Batavia.
This I've heard about.
Yeah, so it struck a coral reef in the East Indies before he could mutiny. More than 300 people were shipwrecked. Some of the soldiers aboard set sail to try and find an island with fresh water, because there was no fresh water on the island that they were marooned upon. And while they were gone, Cornelius was one of the main instigators in the systematic murder of over 100 men, women, and children. And when the soldiers came back, they tried him and his colleagues and chopped his hands off and then hanged him. So that was the real Geronimus Cornelius. Now, Paul Verhoeven, about 15 years ago, maybe more, was going to make a film called The Batavia.
And if it's Paul Verhoeven doing it.
Oh, man. I remember reading
the imagination.
I remember reading that and thinking, oh, fuck yeah. Give me this film.
Yeah.
Never happened. Never got the funding for it.
Basic Instinct Part 2.
Yeah.
Very
sad.
Captain. Yeah.
That would have been a fucking grim film.
Show sailors.
Oh my God. That would have been so grim. But anyway, Bastable really likes Harding. He really likes, Quelch. But it says, I suppose it was my strong affection for Captain Quelch which led to the first disaster of my new life. A disaster which was to lead to others of increasing consequence until the final one. But again, I'm running ahead of my story.
Affection will do that.
Oh.
Leads to disaster.
It all began with a freakish change in the weather after we had left San Francisco, bound for British Ecuador, Tahiti, Tonga, and points west. You could blame it on the elements, I suppose, or on me, but I'm rather inclined to blame an offensive little Californian scout leader called Reagan. Certainly if Reagan had not come aboard the locomotive, I should not have found myself at the centre of subsequent events. Events which were to alter the destinies of a good many people, and perhaps even the whole world. Now, of course, it's Egan in yours, isn't it?
He is Egan in mine. And now, as much as I object to the overly broad appellation of Michael Jagger, I have to say, I do approve of the use of Reagan in this instance, because he's a much more substantial character. He's a linchpin for which lots of things, depend on it. And to call him Egan, it reeks of two things to me. The first one is, it's a missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is, I bet you anything that he wanted to use the term Reagan, the name.
Well,
and I will bet you as well that the publishers said, avoid that. Given that Jimmy Ballard, not long before, had written that short story called Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Well, the 1971 edition, it's Reagan.
Oh.
It is Reagan in this edition.
Very interesting.
But then, for subsequent editions, which includes the manuscript used for the Grafton Omnibus, and all the 70s editions beyond this, and all of the English editions until the 1990s, it was Egan.
I bet there was a complaint. Somebody must have complained.
Well, apparently it was at the insistence of editors.
So?
Because Reagan's profile was rising. Because in 1971, what's Reagan doing?
Governor
of California. But his profile is rising within the Republican Party.
That's right, on a national level, yes.
Yeah. So by the mid-70s, editors are getting a little bit nervous and thinking, you know what, not sure about this. But even then, in all British editions until the first Millennium edition of 1993, it's Egan. It's not Reagan. I recall reading a blog review of this years ago when the reviewer suggested that Moorcock must have added it in the 80s, but it's definitely not the case.
Hey, see, that was my initial assumption.
Yeah, because it's Reagan in the Ace edition, but it was altered for all of those subsequent editions, and that stuck all the way through to those reissues, because someone was sensitive to the fact that Reagan was being portrayed as a small-minded bigot, and it was potentially controversial for science fiction books being pulled off the shelf. Which is weird, really, because Behold the Man was right there on the shelf next to it.
But at the same time, when Ballard published the Atrocity exhibition, 69, around then, I think, it was in that same period, and if I remember correctly, that led to some trouble for his American publishers. So, given their association and their friendship, professional and personal proximity to one another, I wouldn't be surprised if in the publishing world in America, which was sort of taking its first, sniff at these guys, that this would be an issue.
It's funny, isn't it? Because, was California a massive market for books? It irritates me that it carried over into the English editions. It irritates me, number one, that the 71 Ace edition, which was the original manuscript, was in America, but by the time the English edition was published, it was using the altered manuscript.
So here's what I think.
Which is crackers.
I have no justification to back this up, but it's just an educated guess. When in America, of course, we have libel law, right? But it is not nearly as strict or strenuous as British libel law is. And so when you have the means to sue somebody for libel in America, by the means, I mean the money, file your lawsuit in Britain, right? Because you're going to have the probability of a good outcome for you and a bad outcome for the writer or the publisher is going to be much, much higher in Britain than it would be in the United States. That's why that's why it is and please, any attorneys who are on this call who know about this stuff, who listen to this podcast, please tell me I'm wrong at some point in the future, but that's how I've always understood it.
Oh yeah, answers on a postcard. Yeah, definitely.
Right.
I mean, it's funny because of course I read the Grafton Omnibus back in the day. That's how I read the Land Leviathan and the Steel Tsar for the first time. I had the exact same omnibus that you're reading from, so I picked that up. I was super confused when I reread Warlord there and was thinking, this is Egan now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it kind of made some kind of sense because I'm reading it in the mid-'80s when Reagan's the president.
Right.
But even in 71, he's got that kind of profile. And I suppose if we look at modern equivalents now, you don't have to be the president or even the vice president of the USA to have a significant profile as an arsehole, because I'm British, but I still know Ron DeSantis and Lindsey Graham are, for example. But I've got the benefit of the internet.
My profession forbids me from commenting.
Yeah.
I'm just I'm going to nod sagely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all right. I can comment away. But, I watch clips from the Daily. Basically, I get all of my information about Lindsey Graham and Ron DeSantis from clips of The Daily Show or Seth Meyers, probably on YouTube. But
they're decent sources for that, for clips.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are fucking assholes. And, I don't expect you to respond to that. But, yeah, I mean, people didn't have the benefit of the internet in those days, but Moorcock was savvy. He was politically savvy, and he knew that he was writing for American audiences as well as British audiences. And
so, what we don't know, and what you could always ask him if it's interesting enough for him to discuss when you have him on the next time, is was that were you managing up, right? Were you, and there's no shame in that, right? But good move, or did somebody drop the penny and say, maybe you should ixnay on the Eigenray?
Yeah, well, according to John Davey and Moorcockography, they were unauthorised changes, and I don't think Moorcock was even consulted on them. But he must have been aware that as that altered manuscript was used for subsequent editions for the rest of the 70s and all of the 1980s, he must have been aware of it, but maybe he just thought, it's not a battle I can be asked to fight.
Yeah, because, I mean, think about, ultimately you have other books to write.
Yeah, that's right. And by the 1980s, he's writing his Piat books, he's writing Mother London, putting a lot of these things behind him. Throughout the 80s, he's not really looking back.
No.
He's looking forward, and he's trying to be, for want of a better expression, I found it a little bit irritating. He's trying to be a more literary author.
It's a forgivable term to use, as much as I agree with you about the derisive notion that using that term connotes for the earlier work. We still know it when we see it. And he was good at it. He grew as a writer. And if you want to call that something else, then call it something else. If it's easier shorthand for us to deal with, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he ever used that expression. But I think once he won the Guardian Fiction Prize for The Condition of Muzak,
yes,
he's still looking at some of his fantasy stuff, but it's a lot more complex. He's writing The War Under the World's Pain, and then The City in the Autumn Stars, which is very dense compared to his 70s and 60s output.
I read it when I was too young. A lot of it went over my head, and I'm eager to revisit.
I really look forward to rereading that.
Yeah.
I've got to say, but we haven't even covered The War Under the World's Pain yet. So, years down the line, yeah. I mean, fuck. This is probably going to be episode 125, and we still haven't got to the cure for cancer yet. So,
that's right.
We'll see. Anyway, I wonder what Scout Leader Reagan gets up to. Will he be all chill and groovy? No, he won't. But we won't find out until part 2. Because I think we're going to have to stop there. We'll be going nearly 2.5 hours.
I'm ready. I'm ready whenever you are. And by the way, we're going to have to talk only for a minute or two rather than have a symposium about what old Robert does when he's not here on a podcast talking about Moorcock or working over at Reuters on the weekend shift.
Tell us.
So, folks, I engage in the ethically dubious practice of making music using artificial intelligence. I write my lyrics, but I also combine them with collage and cut-ups from publicly available documents, right? Documents in the public domain, ranging from all the way back to the Mesopotamian times, up to and including press releases and spam emails. And I've covered the Roman Empire and the Greeks. I'll take from anything: medieval treaties, discarded love letters, whatever it is, and I turn these into songs, and I explore a lot of different genres. And basically, I'm writing these songs. I'm conceiving of the music. I'm conceiving of the instrumentation, basically the suite of instruments. And some of those songs are really silly, and they don't really mean a lot of anything. They're just kind of groovy and fun, and others are fairly serious. I've got a bunch of songs out under my own name on Bandcamp. I call my fake band is called Robert MacMillan and the White Ship Disaster, named after the incident in 11 whatever it was that precipitated the anarchy in England when Henry I, well, anyway, I won't get into all that. But I recently have put out my first album. I took a 6-month break from a really more cocky and viciously frequent style of writing. But I took 6 months off, and then I wrote 10 new songs, and they're coming out on December 8th on streaming on Spotify and Apple and all the rest. But they're on my Bandcamp site now. The album is called Click on Me Sometime. And I've described it as 6 months of psychotherapy, heartbreak, and spam emails rolled into 33 minutes.
So as someone who is instantly, cards on table, instantly repelled by the idea of AI music, explain to me how the process worked for you, and because I think it was quite therapeutic for you, wasn't it?
It has been. It for me. So I've written one nonfiction book in which I distilled the lyrics of Bob Dylan over 700 songs. I put them down,
of course,
into a haiku. I've written a novel which is set in my hometown. I'm writing a second novel at the moment, which all of that to me is very, as we say, artisanal and precise, slow work, because I'm aiming for perfection, or as close as I can get. Writing songs for me is an exercise in just fucking off. I'm blowing off steam. I'll rhyme whatever I want, even if it's not connected, right? I'll try and do anything. If it's groovy, it works, right?
Yeah.
And it's a completely different artistic process. And it's also been something that I've used more recently to get through some more personal issues that I've had that that are not necessarily happy. But it's a way of playing with them and therefore working through some things. And the process of doing it is, I use a piece of software, and which of course makes the music and sings the words, and there's no way around it. Ethically speaking, that's taking from millions of other people who've played instruments and sang songs, right? You're scraping the internet for that stuff, and I'm aware of that. On the other hand, I've written many stories for Reuters, and also personal stories that I've published over my own lifetime that are probably being scraped right now for somebody else to do things with. So I kind of resolve it that way, while knowing that that's a bit of a cop-out. I know what I do as a cop-out. At the same time, I'm making a new creative structure and a new creative edifice and new creative things from material that exists already. Like nobody is going to come up, if you were to listen to one of my songs, you'll know nobody could have come up with that. That was me. And now I'm also I'm trained in classical piano. So I'm a pianist. I'm learning the bass guitar at the moment. It's hard, but I'm having fun.
Yeah.
So I know my music theory. I know my instrumentation. I know how to create things acoustically with my fingers, right, and my voice. Now, does that give me license to do what I'm doing on AI? No, but I'm not some asshole who's putting out just a bunch of dross. Just so I can confuse the public and rip off honest musicians. I'm trying to make something, and I do believe that in another 50 years or so, that just like all the disruptive technologies that have come out that have freaked us out, and you and I were around before the internet, remember that, right? Before the web, I should say. The internet's been around for longer, but we remember a time when there were things of convenience now that we would have had to go to the library to suss out. right?
Mm.
So I'm aware I have that historical scope. I also have a sense of taste and quality, I think. So I don't ask people to like it. I'm really doing it for me.
Mm.
But I hope that they'll be entertained.
I think that if you're doing something and it works for you in terms of processing your recent life events and it's therapeutic, I absolutely support.
Thank you. But I also will say, but even beyond that, I do think that there is a difference. We all know the difference between doing something easy and having it done versus working at making a concept into some kind of reality. And I think even with people who know how to hold a camera and direct, or, a film crew, that there's a difference between people who are going to, paint by numbers to make something that's got to fulfill a certain audience requirement versus perhaps a more of an auteur who's going to try to create something that's going to not just entertain people, but have the stamp of authenticity about it. And I don't think that the difference is made, or the distinction is made by saying one of them used AI and one of them didn't. I think that's it. I think that there are very valid arguments to be had. And I do think that there are things that I do that I'm using that are difficult to justify. But I don't believe that the gap between, or the chasm between creativity and art on one side and crap on the other is created by saying that the defining point of the chasm is AI.
You interrupted me before my but.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I was going to say, but in your defense, you do label your stuff on Bandcamp as AI. So
I don't tell people what I'm doing is real.
There's no
it's
artifice.
real, but I tell them it's AI.
Yeah, there's no artifice, there's no deception, and people can make their own mind up. For me, I don't like the idea of AI music, and I'm not convinced that it's a thing. But the fact that you say that you're a classically trained pianist, your voice has a beautiful timbre, right? You're writing your own lyrics. What I would absolutely fall over myself to hear is you singing your lyrics with a musical background created by you. That I would find emotionally involving, and I would love to hear it.
My editor, my boss, my supervisor is a very talented multi-instrumentalist, and we have been talking about making some demos from some of that stuff. I would love it. And if I could afford a band and a studio, that would be incredible.
You know what, the wonders of music these days, and certainly the wonders of things like Bandcamp and simple, easy to buy, easy to pick up audio interfaces and everything else, is, and when I started doing a podcast, I was surprised just how inexpensively you could buy things and how easy it is to edit things, use it. Basically, anybody's bedroom with a laptop and an audio interface is a studio.
Well, and you know what else? So my neighbor introduced me to a guy he used to work with in the world of finance. This guy quit finance. Now he's gone down to, I'm not sure he quit finance, but he's gone to Nashville and he's living down there, and he has a stage name as a country singer. And I love his stage name, Merle Hazard.
Nice. But, funnily enough, Mel Haggard's "Okie from Muskogee" is my
karaoke. Know.
It's my karaoke speciality.
Yes, indeed, and White Lightning is still the biggest thrill of all. That song never ceases to amuse me. But but this guy Merle Hazard, he said to me, "So look, you know how to write lyrics." He says, "Most people don't." And I said, "Well, I know a song structure. I mean, I'm trained in it." And he said, bands and session musicians and cats, studio cats, as they call them, he says, they're a dime a dozen down here and they want to record. He says, why don't you sell some of these songs? Better yet, why don't you pay less money than you think and have a band do them, and you can sing them with the band? And I thought, holy fucking shit, maybe I should go to Nashville next year.
You don't need to go to Nashville. I bet you any money on the Azores, there are hundreds of musicians.
The people I was partying with just last night when I stayed out too late, three brothers and their father. He's the leader of the local Philharmonic. All three of those boys are multi-instrumentalists. Drums, bass, keyboards. I mean, they got it. So we were talking about that a little bit the other day. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if ever I turn up on your island in a dirty linen suit, I will sing one of your songs.
That would be fucking brilliant.
Might be pub singer style.
I would love it. It'd be like the 101ers.
Yeah.
You know what? Schwartz.
We will create our own Diddy band.
Oh, wait, even better. Ian Dury.
Nice.
Yeah. I like his funk.
Well, you know what? We've been going over 2.5 hours. We're going to have to come back for part 2 and continue this conversation. See what Rough Rider Ronnie gets up to. But, thank you so much for taking the time to drop by Derry and Tom's. We've been talking about this for probably 4 years. We've finally made it happen.
We can do the next one much, much sooner.
Yeah, cool. Well, what I'll do is I'll drop you a line, read dates, and we'll get something booked in so we don't leave this dangling for too long.
Yeah, and regards in the meantime to Phil, to Andy Darby, to Laws, to Tash, to everybody else whose names I can't always keep them all in my head, but I know all their voices. I love listening to your show.
You know what? I love the fact that you love listening. So thank you as ever for your support and being a friend of the show and being a friend to us. And we'll see you again soon.
Until next time.
Many thanks to Robert for taking the time to join me from his island lair. Robert's 2016 book, Haiku 61 Revisited, the songs of Bob Dylan interpreted as haiku, and his 2021 novel, The History Student, are available now and will keep you posted as to the progress of his next novel. If you're curious, you can find his experiments in AI-generated music on Bandcamp by searching Robert MacMillan and the White Ship Disaster. We'll be back in 2026 to pick up the Bastable thread and many more things besides. If you're interested in some deep thinking regarding the entire Bastable sequence, then check out Michael Hopwood's thoughts on the Bibliophile Adventures podcast. That podcast has been dormant since 2020, but those episodes are still available on Spotify. But in the meantime, thanks as ever to our glorious patrons, those without tier, Anthony Paconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And to our chaos engineers, Ed Von Stork, Andrew Clark, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Ben Hagar, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave F., Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner-Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Michael Hopwood, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Rex Ossius Nusquam, Scott Butler, Simon Perrins, Steve Braun, and, new to the Don Blas, Roger McCarthy. Thanks for coming aboard, Roger. And of course, thanks to our crafty jugaderos, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Alexander Harris, Chris Sharp, Christian Hundal, James Connell, Graham Holden, Kevin Williams, Liam Turner, Loz, Matt Buckley, Mark Hewlett, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Murray Palmer, Nick Hopkinson, Urfa Ziv, Sean Twist, Toby White, and Taylor Lavery. An eternal thanks to our patron demons, Action Edmonds, Alistair Davison, Andy Darby, Brian Henderson, David Lee, Derek Clunan, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Janie Stim, Jason Vogel, Joachim Sund, Joe Monty, Johan Hjarper, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Liam Jones, Marius Latauskas, Mark Hebden, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tone Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last, but of course, never least, Robert MacMillan. Okay, enough of my blather. Don't forget you can follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. We have our Patreon page too, of course, and there are a few extra odds on sods on there. But until next time, wherever you are in the world, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.